What would you do if someone you've never met was about to change everything you've worked for? It was just another Wednesday morning when Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, sat at his desk in the sleek, modern office overlooking the bustling streets of Palo Alto. He just finished a round of emails, a phone call with a government official about the next Mars mission, and was sipping on his usual morning coffee, black, no sugar. But then, something caught his eye. A letter. A thick, unmarked envelope. He raised an eyebrow, curious. Most letters he received were from investors, government agencies, or other companies looking to collaborate. But this one didn't have a return address. It was handwritten, the kind of thing you don't expect from a professional industry, more like something you might get from an eccentric inventor or an old friend. Opening it with a flick of his wrist, Elon scanned the contents quickly. Dear Mr. Musk, my name is Nick Hamilton. I'm 17 years old, and I've developed a revolutionary technology that can change the world. I've built a car that runs entirely on water. I believe this technology can solve the world's energy crisis, and I'd like you to see it for yourself. I'll be presenting it at a private event this Saturday. I would be honored if you would attend. Sincerely, Nick Hamilton. Elon blinked. A car that runs on water? At first, it sounded like one of those crazy, far-fetched ideas that were quickly dismissed in the tech world. But then again, Elon knew that the world often underestimated people with bold ideas, just like they had underestimated him when he first started Tesla, when he first started talking about sending people to Mars. He had seen the future where things were possible, even if no one else did. Still, this was new. Elon took a deep breath, feeling a twinge of curiosity mixed with skepticism. He had dealt with countless engineers, scientists, and inventors, each claiming to have the next big breakthrough. But a teenager who had built a car that ran on water? It sounded impossible, ridiculous, even. Yet, there was something about the simplicity of the idea that made him wonder. Could it really be true? He knew he had to check it out. If anything, it would be an interesting experience. Saturday arrived, and Elon walked into the event hall with his usual air of calculated confidence. The room was filled with dozens of curious spectators, many of them young engineers, environmentalists, and a few venture capitalists who had all heard about the mysterious invention that promised to change the future. Elon's presence was, as always, noticed immediately, and people began whispering to each other, speculating about what was about to happen. In the center of the room was a car. It didn't look like anything extraordinary, but it was sleek, modern, and undeniably intriguing. Nick Hamilton, a tall, slender teenager with short brown hair and a quiet intensity, stood beside it. He wore a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing extravagant, nothing to distract from the moment. Elon walked over to the car, studying it with a mix of interest and skepticism. The kid was clearly smart, but was he really onto something groundbreaking? Or was this just another wild claim? Nick greeted him with a firm handshake. Mr. Musk, thank you for coming. I know you're a busy man. Elon nodded. I try to make time for things that might actually matter. Let's see what you've got. Nick smiled, but there was a nervousness to his demeanor, something that made Elon wonder if this was a moment the teenager had been dreaming about for years or dreading. Nick took a deep breath and began explaining his invention. This car uses a unique engine I've developed that separates hydrogen from water. It converts the hydrogen into power for the vehicle's motor. Essentially, it's a closed system. No emissions, just pure water as fuel. No gasoline, no batteries, just water. Elon was quiet for a moment, processing the words. Hydrogen-powered cars were nothing new, but this was different. If it was truly as Nick claimed, then this could upend everything. The oil industry, the electric car market, everything. Water, Elon muttered. You're telling me this car runs on water? Nick nodded, his voice full of quiet conviction. Yes, Mr. Musk. I know it sounds impossible, but I can show you how it works. Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. I've heard a lot of things in my time. Show me. Nick motioned to a small stage at the front of the room, where a demonstration setup was ready. With a few taps on his phone, the car engine roared to life, its sleek metallic body humming with energy. There was no exhaust, no noise beyond the gentle purr of the motor, just the quiet hum of pure, clean energy. The audience gasped, some of them in disbelief, others in awe. Elon felt a strange stir of excitement in his chest, but also a rising suspicion. Could this really be happening? Nick took a few steps toward the car, his voice steady as he explained the details of how the engine worked. The system separates the hydrogen from water through electrolysis, but instead of using external electricity, it's powered by a self-sustaining reaction created by the engine itself. It's efficient, and it produces zero waste. Elon took a moment to process. This wasn't just an idea, it was a working prototype. Nick wasn't just talking theory, he was showing results. Impressive, Elon said after a long silence. But how do you explain the energy conversion? If this works, why isn't the world already using it? Nick's eyes darkened slightly, his gaze shifting to the crowd. That's the problem. Big energy companies, oil corporations, they don't want this to succeed. They'd rather the world stay dependent on fossil fuels. The tech isn't exactly, well, welcome. Elon studied him for a moment, wondering if there was more to this than met the eye. It was clear that Nick wasn't just some kid with a dream. He was passionate, driven, and maybe even a little naive. But still, there was something in his eyes that made Elon pause. What do you want from me? Elon asked, his voice steady. Nick's response came quickly. I want you to help me bring this to the world. I've been doing this alone for years, and I can't do it without support. I need someone who understands how to make this happen, someone who can get it into production. Elon mused over the offer. Helping a teenager who had invented a car that ran on water? It sounded like the kind of thing he would have laughed at a few years ago. But now, in this moment, looking at the quiet confidence in Nick's eyes, something told him that this might be the future. All right, Elon said, after a long pause. Let's see where this goes. But don't get ahead of yourself. There's a lot to work out. Nick smiled, relief washing over his face. Thank you, Mr. Musk. You won't regret this. As Elon stood there, looking at the car that might just change everything, he felt a strange sense of excitement and fear. The world was on the brink of something new, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't entirely sure what would happen next. What do you think? Could this really be the future of energy? Would you trust a teenager's invention to save the planet? Let us know in the comments. Elon Musk had always been a man of vision. From a young age, he saw the world differently, and that perspective shaped everything he did. From his childhood in South Africa to his eventual rise as one of the most influential figures in technology and space exploration. Born in 1971, Elon grew up in a world that was just beginning to witness the birth of the digital age. He was a curious child, constantly reading and experimenting with electronics. But his early years weren't easy. His parents divorced when he was young, and Elon was often the target of bullying. He'd spent hours lost in his imagination, reading books on science fiction and technology, trying to find a way to escape from the pain of adolescence. Little did he know, those books would one day serve as the blueprint for his future. By the time he was a teenager, Elon had already taught himself how to program and sold his first video game, Blaster, at the age of 12. He was a prodigy, but also a loner. His intelligence, while a gift, also set him apart from most of his peers. He went on to study physics and economics at the University of Pennsylvania, and then quickly ventured into the world of tech startups. His first company, Zip2, which he co-founded with his brother Kimball, was an online city guide software that eventually sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million. He used that money to fund his next ventures, PayPal, which revolutionized online payments, and then the ambitious SpaceX, which aimed to make space travel affordable and sustainable. With Tesla, he brought electric cars into the mainstream, proving that sustainable energy could be both stylish and powerful. And then there was SolarCity, the Boring Company, Neuralink, and even his plans for colonizing Mars. Elon had become a household name, a symbol of relentless ambition and innovation, driven by a desire to solve the world's most pressing problems. But despite all his success, there was always something more for Elon to prove. He often joked about how he saw himself as an alien, someone who didn't fit into the world he lived in, someone who didn't belong in the traditional structures of business or society. And yet, it was that very feeling that drove him to achieve the impossible. But now, standing in front of a 17-year-old who claimed to have invented a car that ran on water, Elon felt a familiar tension rise in his chest. It wasn't just about the technology. It was the challenge, the possibility that someone else might have beaten him to solving one of the greatest problems humanity faced, the energy crisis. Elon had spent years building Tesla to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. But he was also well aware that the oil and gas industries had a stranglehold on the global market. They had fought tooth and nail to stop every clean energy innovation that threatened their profits. If Nick's car was real, if it really ran on water, then it could potentially revolutionize the way the world looked at energy. But more importantly, it could disrupt the delicate balance of power that Elon himself was so intricately woven into. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a teenager, someone he could have easily dismissed as another idealistic dreamer, threatening to shake up the very industry he had spent so many years trying to change. But that was the thing about Elon Musk. He didn't shy away from competition, especially when it came to matters of the future. And Nick Hamilton? Well, he was no ordinary kid. Elon's mind raced as he walked through the event hall later that day. As much as he tried to push aside the notion that Nick's invention could be real, something about the young inventor's focus and determination lingered in his mind. He remembered his own early days, when no one believed in his wild ideas, when people laughed at the idea of electric cars or space travel for private companies. But here he was, a decade into transforming those impossible dreams into reality. Nick's technology, if it worked, could be as revolutionary as any of Elon's own ventures. It could create a world where cars didn't need fuel, where energy wasn't just a commodity controlled by powerful corporations. For a moment, Elon allowed himself to imagine a world where water, not oil or electricity, was the fuel that powered everything. It would be the ultimate leap forward, a giant step for humanity. But there was something even bigger at play. Power. Control. Who would control this new energy source? Nick, this teenager who had created something no one believed was possible? Or the entrenched forces that had dominated the energy industry for over a century? A few days later, Elon met with his trusted team at Tesla's headquarters. He had invited some of his most brilliant engineers and scientists to discuss Nick Hamilton's technology. "We need to take this seriously," Elon said, pacing around the conference table. "This kid, he might actually have something. The question is, how do we verify it?" One of the engineers, a young woman named Sarah, spoke up. "If this is real, it could change everything. But we need to run tests. We can't just take his word for it." Elon nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "Agreed. But if it is real, we'll need to act fast. The energy industry won't let this slide. They'll fight us hard. Do we want to fight them?" Sarah asked cautiously. Elon paused, his gaze drifting toward the window, where the Tesla factory loomed in the distance, humming with activity. "We don't have a choice. If this works, we need to make sure it's done right. We're not just fighting for technology here. We're fighting for the future." The room fell silent as everyone processed the gravity of what Elon was saying. He wasn't just thinking about the company's bottom line or his own legacy. Elon Musk had always been about something bigger, the future of humanity, a future powered by clean, sustainable energy. But now, in the midst of a world-changing innovation from a 17-year-old kid, Elon felt the weight of his own legacy and the world's future press on him more than ever. Nick Hamilton had always been different. Unlike the other kids his age, who spent their time playing video games or worrying about school dances, Nick's mind was always preoccupied with one thing: how to make the world better. It was a thought that had consumed him for as long as he could remember. Born in a small town in Oregon, Nick wasn't surrounded by the usual distractions. His family wasn't rich, nor did they have the kind of influence that could give him an easy ride to success. But Nick didn't care about any of that. His fascination with technology and energy began at an early age when his father, a mechanic, taught him how to tinker with old engines in their garage. As a child, Nick was an observer. He watched the world around him with a quiet intensity, noticing things that others overlooked. The way the world depended on oil, the way pollution choked the air, and how his small town, nestled in the hills, was slowly suffocating under the burden of fossil fuels. Nick couldn't understand why it had to be this way. He couldn't understand why no one had solved this problem yet. His first real breakthrough came when he was just 12 years old. Nick had read about hydrogen fuel cells in a science magazine and became obsessed. He started experimenting with small electrical circuits, trying to figure out how they worked. When he was 14, he built a small-scale hydrogen fuel cell from materials he had scavenged from his dad's workshop. It wasn't much, just a tiny model, but it was enough to ignite a fire within him. That was when he made a decision that would change his life. He was going to solve the world's energy crisis, not by working for some big corporation or waiting for someone else to do it, but by using his own hands, his own mind, to invent something that could change everything. Nick's obsession with energy grew even more intense in high school. By the time he was 16, he had already read dozens of books on energy systems, alternative fuel sources, and environmental science. His school grades were solid, but his real passion was in his garage, where he spent late nights tinkering, experimenting, and building prototypes. His first few attempts were failures, many of them. There were explosions, electrical fires, and a few near misses with cutting-edge materials that just didn't work the way he had hoped. But Nick wasn't discouraged. In fact, each failure only made him more determined. He had spent the last few years focusing on one thing: creating a car that didn't rely on gasoline or batteries, but on water. Water was abundant, clean, and most importantly, free. The idea seemed simple enough, but the technology was complex. Nick had to design a system that could efficiently separate hydrogen from water and convert it into usable energy, something that had eluded scientists for decades. But Nick was different. He wasn't bound by the traditional limitations. He was willing to think outside the box, to take risks that others would shy away from. By the time he was 17, Nick had built a prototype, a sleek, water-powered car that ran on nothing but water. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The engine worked. The car moved. Nick had done what seemed impossible, and it was only a matter of time before the world would take notice. Nick's decision to reach out to Elon Musk wasn't made lightly. He knew the world of innovation was competitive, cutthroat even, and he'd always dreamed of working with someone like Musk. But it wasn't about the fame or the glory. It was about getting his invention out into the world, where it could make a difference. For weeks, Nick wrestled with the idea of sending that letter. He'd followed Elon's career for years, admired his drive and determination. But Nick didn't want to come off as just another kid with a pipe dream. This wasn't about attention. It was about changing the world. One night, while working on his car in the garage, Nick had an epiphany. His invention was a game changer, but without the right kind of support, it could be buried in the sands of time, overshadowed by larger corporations and entrenched industries. If anyone had the resources, the knowledge, and the ambition to help him take his idea to the next level, it was Elon Musk. With his heart pounding, Nick wrote the letter. He poured everything into it: his passion, his dreams, and his hopes for a cleaner, better future. He didn't expect much, but he knew he had to try. And now, he was here, standing in front of Elon Musk, ready to show the world what he had built. As Nick stood on stage, watching Elon walk through the room, he couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. This was the moment he had been working for his entire life. But even as he introduced himself to the Tesla CEO, his mind was racing. What if it's not enough? What if Elon doesn't see the potential? He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a school project or an experiment anymore. This was his life's work, his future, and possibly the future of the planet. He had to make it count. As he spoke to Elon, explaining his invention in greater detail, Nick could see the wheels turning in Elon's head. Elon was quiet, assessing the situation, and Nick couldn't quite read his expression. Was he impressed? Skeptical? Or was he already thinking about the implications this technology might have on his own business? It wasn't just about the car for Nick. It was about proving that it could work, that it wasn't some half-baked idea. It was about showing Elon Musk, the man who had done so much to revolutionize energy and space, that there was still room for more innovation. It was about proving that anyone, even a teenager from a small town, could make a difference. Do you think Nick's youth is a disadvantage, or could it actually be his greatest strength? What would you do if you were in his shoes, trying to get the world's attention with a groundbreaking invention? Elon Musk had seen his fair share of innovators. Throughout his career, He had met with countless engineers, inventors, and entrepreneurs who claimed to have the next big thing. Some were genuine, others, not so much. But there was something different about Nick Hamilton. As the private event continued, Elon couldn't help but feel a growing sense of intrigue, mixed with a tinge of caution. The car ran on water. If it worked as Nick said, it could upend the entire energy and automotive industries. But the question remained, could it really work? After the demonstration, Elon took a step back to observe the reactions of the crowd. Many of them were entranced, whispering excitedly among themselves. A few were skeptical, whispering questions about the practicality of such a system. Elon, however, remained silent, his mind racing through every possibility. The young inventor, Nick, was standing at the center of the room, answering questions, explaining the technology in further detail. But to Elon, Nick's words became a distant hum as he began to think about the implications. If this technology worked, it could change the world. But could it be real? Could a teenager really pull this off? Elon's thoughts were interrupted by one of his closest advisors, Sarah, who had been standing beside him since the demonstration. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked, her voice low. Elon looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's impressive, no doubt. But we need more than just a demonstration. We need to test this technology under real-world conditions. We need to know if it can scale." Sarah nodded. "I agree. But if it's legitimate, we have to act quickly. Whoever gets this tech to market first controls the future." Elon was quiet for a moment, mulling over the statement. In all his years of building Tesla, he had learned that being first didn't guarantee success, especially when it came to disrupting entrenched industries. The oil companies, he thought. The car manufacturers who rely on fossil fuels. They'd fight tooth and nail to keep the status quo. The same companies had tried to block Tesla's success at every turn. Now, if this water-powered car was legitimate, it could threaten not just Tesla's business, but every oil and gas company in the world. Whoever controlled this kind of clean energy would have the power to reshape the entire global economy. And the question was, who would control it? Later that evening, Elon invited Nick to join him for a more private conversation. They sat in a quiet corner of the hall, far from the lingering crowds. Elon studied the young inventor across the table, trying to read his face. "So, tell me more about how this system works," Elon said, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. Nick, eager to dive deeper into the science, launched into an explanation about the hydrogen separation process, the electrolysis mechanism, and how he had developed a unique, self-sustaining energy conversion system that didn't require external electricity. As he spoke, Elon listened intently, nodding occasionally, but his mind was already thinking several steps ahead. The idea of a water-powered car wasn't new. Hydrogen fuel cells had been proposed for years as an alternative to gasoline-powered engines. However, the challenge was always in the efficiency, converting water into usable energy without consuming more power than was being produced. If Nick had cracked that code, then this would be a monumental breakthrough. But there were so many unknowns. When Nick finished speaking, Elon leaned back in his chair. "This could be groundbreaking, Nick, but I need to know more. I need to see more. A one-time demonstration isn't enough. I need to understand the entire process, the mechanics behind this. Can you show me?" Nick hesitated for a moment, clearly nervous, but nodded. "Of course. I can bring you the full technical details and a working prototype for you to test. But I'll need your help. I'm just one person. I don't have the resources to get this to the next level. If we're going to make this work, we'll need a team." Elon looked at him with a calculating gaze. "I've got a team. I can bring you the resources you need, but you'll have to be willing to trust me and the people I work with." Nick didn't hesitate. "I trust you, Mr. Musk. I know you can make this happen. You've changed the world with Tesla and SpaceX. I want to change the world too. This is my chance." Elon studied Nick for a long moment, and then something in his expression shifted. There was a glimmer of understanding. Elon Musk wasn't just an entrepreneur or a tech magnate. He was someone who could spot a true visionary. And in front of him, sitting across the table, was just that, a young man with a world-changing idea. "You've got guts, Nick," Elon said, his tone shifting from professional to something more personal. "I like that. Let's see where this goes." As the evening wound down, Elon and Nick parted ways. But Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding before him. The idea of water-powered cars was still too radical for the average person to fully grasp. But for Elon, this was just another challenge. He had always believed in pushing the boundaries of what was possible, whether it was with electric cars, reusable rockets, or going to Mars. He had built his companies around that ethos, questioning the impossible. The question now was, could Nick Hamilton's invention actually change everything? Elon was already thinking ahead. If the technology was legitimate, they would need to do more than just develop the car. They would need to patent the process, protect the intellectual property, and ensure they could bring the car to market before anyone else. But there were dangers as well. If they were wrong, if the technology didn't scale or had unforeseen issues, the backlash could be catastrophic. The world was watching. Elon knew the stakes were high, and that made everything more dangerous, but also more thrilling. The race to revolutionize energy was on, and Nick Hamilton, the teenager who had invented a water-powered car, had just entered the game. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Nick Hamilton's life had completely changed. What had started as a quiet, almost secretive project in his garage was now something that the world was beginning to take seriously. Elon Musk, the tech visionary he had admired for years, was helping him take his invention to the next level. They were building something that could change the world, but also something that could destroy them both if they weren't careful. The first order of business was getting the technology tested. Elon had promised that Tesla's resources would be at Nick's disposal, and true to his word, a team of Tesla engineers was quickly assembled to work with him. They were excited, skeptical, and eager to help, but they also understood the gravity of the situation. If this technology was real, it could upend the entire energy industry. Nick felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. He had spent years tinkering in his father's garage, but now he was in the heart of Tesla's headquarters, surrounded by some of the best engineers in the world. The pressure was immense, but it also fueled his drive. If he could pull this off, he wouldn't just be a local inventor. He could change the course of history. The first test took place in a massive, high-tech laboratory at Tesla's headquarters. Nick, accompanied by Elon and a team of engineers, stood in front of a sleek, modified version of his car, a prototype that had been improved with Tesla's cutting-edge technology. The air in the room was thick with anticipation as the engineers powered up the system. Nick had worked hard to make sure everything was in place. The car, now fitted with a more advanced electrolysis system, was supposed to run entirely on water, using a process that would split the H2O into hydrogen and oxygen and use that to fuel the engine. It was a radical approach, one that could revolutionize the energy landscape if it worked. Elon stood quietly, arms crossed, watching with his usual stoic expression. He trusted Nick, but he also knew that things could easily go wrong. The last thing he needed was another failed experiment. "Are we ready?" Nick asked, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. The head engineer nodded, pressing a button on the console in front of him. "Ready when you are." Nick took a deep breath and climbed into the car. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his pulse racing. This was it, the moment that could change everything. "Here we go," he muttered to himself. The engineers watched closely as Nick turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the engine roared to life. A collective gasp filled the room as the car slowly began to move, gliding forward with the hum of the hydrogen-powered engine. It wasn't fast, certainly not as fast as the Tesla Roadsters or the performance cars that Tesla was known for. But it was moving, powered entirely by water. Elon stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he observed the vehicle. Nick grinned, watching the car as it began to pick up speed. "Is this really happening?" one of the engineers asked in disbelief. "It's happening," Elon said, his voice soft but filled with awe. "It's actually happening." For the next few days, they ran multiple tests, short bursts of acceleration, long-distance runs, and simulations designed to push the limits of the car's technology. The results were extraordinary. The car was functional, efficient, and it was using nothing but water as fuel. It wasn't perfect, of course. The system had its flaws. It wasn't yet efficient enough for mass production, and the hydrogen extraction process still had kinks that needed to be worked out. But the core technology was sound. Nick had done it. He had built a car that ran on water. But the more they tested, the more they realized the enormity of what they had on their hands. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about the entire infrastructure needed to support such a radical shift. Water-powered cars could change everything, but they would require a global transformation of how energy was produced, distributed, and consumed. Elon, ever the strategist, understood this. As exciting as the breakthrough was, he knew they couldn't rush into production. They needed to perfect the technology. They needed to find partners, build the supply chain, and most importantly, protect the intellectual property. "You've done something incredible, Nick," Elon said one evening after a particularly successful round of tests. "But we're only scratching the surface here. This is a huge leap forward, but there's still a long way to go." Nick nodded, feeling the weight of Elon's words. "I know, but we can do it, right? I mean, we've got the resources now, the team, the technology. We're close." Elon smiled slightly, the corners of his mouth turning upward. "We're more than close, but we're also in a race. The moment the world finds out about this, there will be 100 companies trying to steal it. There will be governments, oil conglomerates, automakers all trying to stop us." The stakes were higher than ever. As news of their progress began to leak out, the media started buzzing about Nick Hamilton's water-powered car. Headlines across the world speculated about what this invention could mean for the future of energy, the environment, and the global economy. But with attention came opposition. Within days, the car's potential caught the eye of powerful players, companies that had spent billions on fossil fuels, automakers who had been slow to embrace electric vehicles, and governments who were worried about the economic ramifications of a new, disruptive energy source. They began to lobby, to create doubt, and to demand further scrutiny of the technology. The calls started coming in, threatening calls, legal notices, pressure from influential figures in Washington. Nick knew that this was just the beginning, but he also knew that the technology he had invented was worth fighting for. It was bigger than him, bigger than Elon, bigger than anyone. This was about the future of the planet. And yet, as they fought to protect the technology, another, more insidious challenge was looming. A new player had entered the game. What do you think is the biggest challenge Nick and Elon will face as they continue to develop the water-powered car? The technology is groundbreaking, but will they be able to fight off powerful industries and governments that want to stop them? Let us know what you think in the comments. As the media frenzy surrounding Nick Hamilton's water-powered car intensified, so did the opposition. What had once been a small, almost secretive project, confined to the garage of a teenager, had now become a global story. Headlines were popping up everywhere. A teen invents water-powered car that could end oil dependency. Elon Musk partners with teen genius to revolutionize the auto industry. And of course, will Nick Hamilton's car bring about the end of the oil age? But not everyone was cheering. The first signs of resistance came in the form of legal challenges. Lawsuits started pouring in, some from oil and gas companies, others from automakers who had long relied on fossil fuels for their cars. They were all fighting to delay or block the release of the technology. After all, if it worked, Nick's water-powered car could render the oil industry obsolete, and the automotive giants would be forced to pivot to something they were not ready for. The pressure mounted as the legal teams of powerful corporations descended on Tesla's headquarters. They were armed with teams of lawyers and lobbyists, prepared to challenge the intellectual property rights of Nick's invention, claiming that it was built on existing research that they had patented. They accused Nick of stealing ideas, of violating patents. Elon wasn't surprised. He had seen it all before. Tesla's rise had been met with opposition every step of the way. Lawsuits, political roadblocks, and sabotage from entrenched industries. But this time, the stakes were much higher. If Nick's car became a reality, it could change everything. It could upend the global energy infrastructure. Elon was in his office, his mind racing through the legal threats, when Sarah, his trusted advisor, entered the room. She was visibly frustrated, but she spoke in a calm, measured tone. "We've got a major problem, Elon," she said. "The oil lobby has already begun flooding Congress with requests for investigations into the technology. They want to slow everything down, claiming it's unsafe, untested. They're stirring up fear about what water-powered cars could mean for national security, jobs in the oil and gas industries, and the economy." Elon leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled together in front of him. He was used to this kind of fight. We've faced similar battles before. They want to keep us from succeeding, but they can't stop progress forever. Sarah nodded. True, but this is different. The financial impact of this technology could be catastrophic for them. We've already seen some aggressive tactics. One of the automakers is trying to buy up patents related to hydrogen extraction just to prevent us from going forward. Elon stood up, his face hardening with determination. We're not backing down. We've got the car. We've got the technology. And we've got Nick Hamilton. He's the face of this revolution now. We need to stay focused on getting the car to market. We've fought harder battles. Sarah gave him a serious look. But Elon, we need to prepare for a bigger battle. The people behind these companies, they'll stop at nothing. They've got the money, the influence, and the reach. We're not just fighting legal challenges now. We're fighting an entire industry. The battle lines had been drawn, but it wasn't just legal and corporate forces that Elon and Nick had to contend with. There was something more insidious lurking in the background: political forces. As the public interest grew, so did the attention of powerful political figures, some of whom were aligned with the interests of the oil industry. These politicians began using the threat of water-powered cars to rally their constituents, claiming that such a technological leap could destabilize entire industries, destroy jobs, and create an economic disaster. Some even argued that the car could be a security risk, invoking national interests and suggesting that such powerful energy technology should remain under governmental control. A senator from Texas, a state whose economy was heavily reliant on oil, made a public statement calling for an immediate investigation into the safety of Nick's technology, citing fears of unpredictable consequences. His remarks, broadcasted on every major network, set the tone for the coming political storm. Nick watched all of this unfold with a growing sense of frustration. This wasn't just about proving his car could work. It was about fighting for its existence in a world that wasn't ready for it. Every time the media or a politician questioned the legitimacy of his invention, it felt like another barrier, another mountain he had to climb. Nick had always believed in his invention, but the stakes were higher now. This wasn't just his dream anymore. It was a global race to disrupt one of the most powerful industries in the world. And as the opposition grew louder, Nick began to realize just how much he was up against. In one of the tense strategy meetings at Tesla's headquarters, Elon looked around the room at the key players who had gathered to figure out their next steps. The mood was heavy, but everyone was focused. The legal challenges, the media scrutiny, and the political pressure weren't going to go away anytime soon. We need to change the narrative, Elon said, his voice calm but resolute. We need to control the message. This isn't just about a car. This is about a better future. We can't let the people who are trying to hold us back win. Nick, sitting at the table with the rest of the team, spoke up, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. I'm not going to let them stop me. I didn't do this just for myself. I did it for the planet. We've got something that can change the world, and I'm not backing down. Elon looked at him with a new respect. This wasn't just a kid with a cool invention anymore. Nick had become a symbol of hope, of change, and of resistance against the powerful forces trying to keep the world stuck in the past. Elon and Nick had built something that could change the world. But they were now fighting against the entrenched powers of the oil industry, the politicians who relied on their donations, and the automakers who would lose billions if the world moved away from gas-powered vehicles. The stakes were higher than ever. And as the challenges mounted, both legal and political, Elon and Nick realized they would need to rally the public, create undeniable proof of the car's capabilities, and fight harder than ever to make their dream a reality. Do you think Elon and Nick can overcome the opposition from big oil, automakers, and politicians? What strategies would you suggest for them to win the public over and push through these challenges? Share your thoughts with us. As the legal and political opposition continued to grow, Elon Musk and Nick Hamilton knew they couldn't fight this battle alone. The forces working against them, oil companies, automakers, and certain political figures, were too powerful. They had to find a way to turn the tide in their favor, and for that, they would need allies. But who would be brave enough to join their cause? It didn't take long for them to realize that their best chance lay with the very people who stood to benefit most from a global shift to clean energy: the environmental groups. activists, startups dedicated to alternative energy. But even more critically, they would need to connect with the general public, people who were fed up with the status quo and who yearned for change. If they could make the world see the potential of Nick's water-powered car, public support could give them the leverage they needed to challenge the entrenched powers. Elon's first move was to reach out to some of the leading environmental organizations. If anyone had the power to sway public opinion and rally support, it was them. Elon's reputation preceded him, and within days, he was in touch with leaders of major environmental groups, including the Environmental Defense Fund and Greenpeace. The conversation was surprisingly easy. Everyone understood the stakes, and most were immediately on board. "We're ready to support you," said Sarah Brown, the head of the EDF, during their first meeting. "This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for, the one that will finally reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and drastically cut carbon emissions. But we need to move fast before the opposition buries this." Elon nodded. "I agree. We need to make sure we control the conversation, that the public sees what's at stake. But we also need to prove this isn't just a pipe dream. Nick's invention is revolutionary, but it needs to be tested under real-world conditions. The public will never trust it unless we show them it works, and we have to get ahead of the misinformation campaigns." Nick, who had been mostly quiet in the meeting, spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of the responsibility he felt. "I've always believed in this. But it's not just about a car. It's about making sure the world doesn't keep spinning on fossil fuels. It's about leaving a better planet for future generations." The environmental leaders agreed wholeheartedly. They understood that this was bigger than just one invention or one company. This was about transforming entire industries and creating a more sustainable future. They were in. The next step was to rally the tech and clean energy startups. If Nick's car could prove viable, it would give them the backing and the momentum to challenge the oil industry's long-standing monopoly on energy. Elon, known for his relentless networking, quickly set up a series of meetings with leaders of companies in the renewable energy space, solar startups, hydrogen firms, and battery manufacturers. One of the most promising alliances came when a well-known green energy startup, Blue Horizon Technologies, agreed to partner with Nick and Tesla. They were pioneers in advanced hydrogen storage and distribution, and their technology could help scale the water-powered cars infrastructure. "Look, we're all facing the same battle," said Jonathan Lee, the CEO of Blue Horizon, during their first conversation. "If this works, we all win. We can't afford to let the big oil companies squash something this important. Let's combine forces and make this happen." With Blue Horizon's technology in the mix, they had the chance to build a more robust infrastructure for the car, including the development of efficient hydrogen fueling stations and improved storage systems. They could also help ensure that the car could be powered by clean, renewable energy sources, not just by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. But it wasn't just the environmentalists and clean tech companies who had to be convinced. They still had the public to win over. The people who had grown up with gas stations on every corner and who were used to the status quo. To do that, they would need a marketing campaign that was both inspiring and educational. This wasn't just about a new car. It was about a new way of thinking. It was about giving people hope for a cleaner, sustainable future. Elon, ever the strategist, turned to his team at Tesla for help. "We need to create a movement," he said. "This isn't just about selling a product. This is about showing people that they have the power to choose a better future. We have to tap into the global desire for change and make this the rallying cry for the next generation." They began working with top marketing experts and social media influencers to spread the word. A well-known environmental documentary filmmaker was hired to follow Nick and Elon's journey, showing the world the story behind the car and the people working tirelessly to bring it to life. They also began releasing teasers, short, captivating videos about the future of clean energy and how the water-powered car could change everything. Within a week, hashtags like #WaterPowerRevolution and #CleanEnergyFuture were trending worldwide. People began rallying behind the cause, demanding that governments and corporations take action to support the technology. It wasn't just about buying a car anymore. It was about standing up for the planet. Despite the growing public support, the resistance continued to mount. Powerful lobbyists were now on the offensive, pushing back harder than ever. The oil industry was putting pressure on lawmakers, pouring millions into ad campaigns warning that Nick's water-powered car was a pipe dream and that it was too risky for widespread use. The car hadn't yet been proven on a large scale, and some critics pointed to the high costs of scaling the hydrogen extraction process. The government also voiced concerns about the safety of storing and transporting hydrogen. They feared accidents. They feared the unknown. But Elon wasn't backing down. He knew that the critics would always be there, that there would always be hurdles to overcome. That's how it had been with Tesla and SpaceX. Every time he launched a new venture, the doubters were loud, and the challenges were immense. But Elon had learned that the most important thing was to keep pushing forward. Elon called Nick one evening to check in on the progress. They were sitting in their respective offices, two men with very different backgrounds, but with the same drive to change the world. "How's the test drive going?" Elon asked, referring to the next round of real-world trials they were preparing for. Nick paused before answering. "I think we're ready. The car's been running smoothly, and we've made some adjustments to improve the hydrogen output. But I don't think we can keep it under wraps much longer. The media's getting restless. They want something bigger. They want proof." Elon smiled, his eyes lighting up with that familiar spark of excitement. "Then let's give them proof. Let's take it to the streets. Let's show the world what we've built." The countdown had begun. The team was gearing up for the most critical test yet. It was time for the car to leave the controlled confines of Tesla's testing facilities and take to the open road. The world was waiting to see if Nick Hamilton's invention was truly what it appeared to be. It was a risk, but sometimes the greatest breakthroughs came with the greatest risks. The day had finally arrived. Nick Hamilton stood at the edge of the Tesla testing grounds, his stomach tight with anticipation. After months of secrecy, development, and preparation, the time had come for the world to see his water-powered car in action. This wasn't just another test. This was the public's first glimpse at a technology that could change everything. Elon Musk was by his side, as always, offering his steady presence in the face of mounting pressure. Today, it wasn't just a small-scale test for a handful of engineers and scientists. It was a global event. Journalists, camera crews, and a small crowd of Tesla employees had gathered to watch as the car prepared to make its first public demonstration. Nick had been through many tests in his life, but this was different. This time, it wasn't just about proving the technology to a group of skeptical engineers. It was about convincing the world. This was their chance to shut down the critics, to silence the naysayers, and to put the water-powered car on the map once and for all. Elon clapped him on the back, his tone supportive but practical. "You've done all the prep, Nick. You've got this. Just remember, this is the moment the world has been waiting for." Nick nodded, his nerves still buzzing. He climbed into the driver's seat, checking the controls one more time, adjusting the settings on the dashboard that would initiate the hydrogen extraction from the water. This was it, the moment that could change the course of history. The technology wasn't perfect, but it was revolutionary. And if it worked, it would be undeniable. The crowd watched in silence as the sleek, modified prototype sat idling on the test track. The air was thick with anticipation. Elon, standing on the sidelines, watched with a mix of excitement and caution. The pressure was immense. If the car worked, it would prove everything he and Nick had been working for. If it didn't, well, the consequences would be severe. Public trust, financial backing, and support from key allies all hung in the balance. Nick took a deep breath and pressed the button to start the engine. The familiar hum of the car's electric motor filled the air, and within seconds, the vehicle began to move forward, quietly and efficiently. It wasn't the roar of a gas engine or the whine of an electric car's battery pack. It was the soft hum of hydrogen power, with water fueling the whole thing. The crowd gasped. For the first time, the world was seeing the future of transportation. The car glided effortlessly down the track, turning corners with ease, accelerating smoothly without any visible exhaust or pollution. Nick could feel the car's power beneath him, the smoothness of the ride confirming that this was no gimmick. As the car accelerated down the track, Nick's nerves began to fade. The car was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The hydrogen extraction system was functioning flawlessly, converting water into the necessary fuel with incredible efficiency. The crowd erupted in applause. The car completed several laps of the track, its smooth, efficient motion confirming that the technology was real and it was viable. For the first time, Nick allowed himself to smile. He knew this was just a first step, but it was a huge one. Elon joined him on the track afterward, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did it, Nick. You really did it." Nick looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. This was just the beginning. The car had worked, but now the real fight would begin. The fight to protect the technology and get it into the hands of the public. The media coverage of the test was overwhelming. Headlines flashed across news networks. Water-powered car works in public test. Could end fossil fuels, and teen inventor's water-powered car leaves Tesla test track with flying colors. News anchors excitedly speculated on the possibilities. Could this really be the end of oil? Was the future of transportation here? Could this car be the key to global energy independence? Within hours, the hashtag water-power revolution was trending worldwide. Social media exploded with people expressing their amazement, curiosity, and excitement about the car. The viral reaction was immediate, with millions of shares, posts, and discussions about the potential impact of Nick's invention. Elon couldn't help but smile as he watched the reactions pouring in from around the world. "This is it. This is what we've been working for," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. But Nick was already thinking ahead. The praise was gratifying, but he knew it would only get harder from here. As soon as something like this starts getting attention, the opposition grows louder. And sure enough, the criticism was quick to follow. The success of the public test was undeniable, but it also provoked immediate backlash from some of the world's most powerful industries. The oil giants, automakers, and even some political figures were not content to sit idly by and let this new technology take hold. They had too much at stake. The first attack came from the oil industry. A coalition of the world's largest oil companies released a joint statement casting doubt on the safety and viability of the technology. They questioned whether the hydrogen produced from water could truly be harnessed efficiently on a large scale, and they claimed the process was dangerous. "Water-powered cars are not a feasible solution for the world's energy problems," the statement read. "Until proper regulations and tests are conducted, we cannot trust this technology." Simultaneously, several major automakers, companies with decades of investment in internal combustion engines, issued their own press releases echoing the oil companies' concerns. They argued that the hydrogen extraction process was far too expensive to be practical and that the infrastructure required to support water-powered cars was decades away. Perhaps the most concerning response came from a government official, a U.S. senator who represented a state heavily invested in oil production. He publicly condemned the technology, calling for a halt to all further testing until the long-term risks of hydrogen-powered vehicles could be studied. "We cannot let this reckless push for untested technology jeopardize jobs in our energy sector," he said. "We have to protect American jobs and energy independence." Elon wasn't surprised by the backlash. He had been through similar battles with Tesla, fighting against entrenched industries that didn't want change. But Nick wasn't as used to this kind of resistance. He had been a lone inventor, a quiet genius in his father's garage, and now he was thrust into the center of a global battle that was much bigger than he had ever imagined. Nick sat in a meeting with Elon and the Tesla team, feeling the weight of the criticism. The public support was overwhelming, but the opposition was just as fierce. "I thought the hardest part was building the car," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But now it feels like the real fight is just starting." Elon looked at him, his eyes steady. "You're right. This is the hardest part. But you've done the easy part already. Now, we have to show the world that this technology isn't just real, it's the future." The next step was clear. They had to fight back against the misinformation and resistance. The public wanted to believe in this new future, but it wasn't enough for just a car to work. They needed proof that it could be scaled. They needed to see that it wasn't just a one-off success, but a viable solution for the world's transportation needs. Elon and Nick both knew that if they were going to win this battle, they couldn't just rely on tech demonstrations and media buzz. They needed to show that their water-powered car could be produced at scale, that the infrastructure could support it, and that it was economically viable. They would need to do something bigger. How do you think Nick and Elon should handle the growing backlash from the oil companies, automakers, and politicians? Should they try to prove the technology's scalability immediately, Or should they focus on rallying more public support to counter the opposition? What's the next step for them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The backlash from the oil giants, automakers, and government officials had reached a fever pitch, but Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk knew that the only way forward was to rise above the noise. To prove that this wasn't just a flash in the pan, they had to show the world that the water-powered car could scale. But how? Elon, as always, was the first to come up with a bold idea. "We've got to take this thing on a world tour," he said, pacing back and forth in the Tesla boardroom. "We need to show that this technology isn't just a pipe dream. We need to prove that we can take it from a prototype to something that's ready for mass adoption." Nick's eyes widened. The idea was ambitious, even by Elon's standards. But deep down, Nick knew it was the only way to go. They couldn't afford to wait for the infrastructure to slowly develop over years. They had to move fast, and they had to move big. "We'll take it to cities that are struggling with pollution and high fuel costs," Elon continued. "Places where people will see the potential immediately. Let's show them the benefits of going water-powered, not just as a car, but as a whole new way of thinking about energy. We'll do public demonstrations, let people test drive it, and we'll show that the infrastructure can work in real-world conditions." Nick nodded. "Let's do it." Within weeks, the water-powered revolution tour was officially underway. The first stop, Los Angeles, a city suffering from chronic air pollution and an over-reliance on fossil fuels. It was a perfect place to show the world just how much this new car could impact everyday life. The car was shipped to the city in a Tesla Semi, and they set up a temporary test track on the outskirts of downtown. The media coverage was enormous. News outlets from around the world began reporting on the event. Public interest was at an all-time high, with people eagerly waiting to get a chance to test the car. Nick and Elon stood together, nervously watching as the first group of attendees climbed into the vehicle for their test drives. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. Some were skeptics, but most were hopeful. The water-powered car had the potential to disrupt not just the automotive industry, but the entire energy landscape. Elon gave a quiet nod to Nick. "This is it. It's all about the public now. If they buy in, it's game over for the opposition." Nick's hands gripped the steering wheel as he took the first test drive himself. The car handled beautifully, the acceleration smooth, the steering responsive. It was everything he had hoped for, and more. As he completed a few laps around the track, the crowd erupted into applause. The technology was real, and it was working. But the real magic happened later in the day when they held the public demonstration. Elon and Nick stood together on the stage as a live video feed from the car's dashboard showed exactly how the water was being converted into hydrogen and used to power the vehicle. The engineers had designed the system so that it was easy to understand for a general audience. No complicated science jargon, just a simple breakdown of how water could fuel a car. The crowd's reaction was electric. People were stunned. The car, fueled only by water, was gliding effortlessly around the track. The roar of gas-powered engines was a distant memory. As Nick finished his demonstration, he stepped up to the microphone. "This isn't just about a new car. This is about creating a future where we can power our lives without relying on fossil fuels. It's about showing that the impossible is possible, and it starts today." The applause that followed was deafening. The Los Angeles event was just the beginning. Over the next few months, the tour continued to cities around the world: Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney, and Sao Paulo. Each stop was met with the same excitement and public enthusiasm. The water-powered car was a hit in every city, with people lining up to see it in action. Environmental groups rallied behind it, local governments offered support, and even skeptical automakers began taking a closer look at the technology. The global response was overwhelmingly positive. But, as expected, the opposition didn't back down. The oil companies and car manufacturers were still trying to discredit the technology at every turn, throwing up legal challenges and lobbying against it in government. Despite the success of the world tour, the fight was far from over. The oil giants, along with their political allies, launched a full-scale campaign to discredit the water-powered car. They began running TV ads full of fear-mongering messages, warning the public about the dangers of hydrogen and claiming that the technology was unproven and unsafe. One ad in particular became notorious. It featured an actor wearing a lab coat, speaking in ominous tones. Hydrogen is a dangerous substance. Water-powered cars are nothing more than a fantasy. We cannot risk our future on untested technology. The ad played on the public's fear of anything new and unfamiliar. It wasn't enough for the oil companies to fight the technology on the grounds of economic or environmental impact. They knew that people needed to be afraid. Elon, however, was unfazed. He had dealt with campaigns like this before. He knew that fear-mongering would only go so far. The truth was on their side. "Nick, it's time to go on offense," Elon said one day as they sat in their meeting room, reviewing the latest round of negative ads. "We need to show people that the truth is stronger than their fear. We need to bring in the scientists, the engineers, the experts, and we need to show them exactly how this works." Elon and Nick decided to hold a massive press conference, a showdown, really, with the world's media watching. They invited leading scientists, environmentalists, and energy experts to speak alongside them, all of whom were eager to publicly support the water-powered car and debunk the myths the oil industry had been spreading. Nick was calm, but his heart was racing as he stood on stage beside Elon. The press was there in full force, cameras flashing, microphones ready. This was the moment they would either silence their critics or let the opposition take control of the narrative. Elon stepped up to the podium first. "We've heard the lies, we've heard the fear, but we're here today to tell you the truth. The water-powered car is real, it works, and it's safe. We have the data, we have the scientists, and we have the future on our side." The scientists, engineers, and environmentalists who joined them all spoke passionately about the potential of the technology. They explained how hydrogen could be safely extracted from water and used in vehicles, how the system had been rigorously tested, and how it could change the world's energy systems for the better. As the press conference concluded, Elon turned to Nick. "This is the turning point. We've got the truth on our side, and the world is listening. Let's show them what we can do." The media storm following the press conference was unlike anything they had experienced before. Public support for the water-powered car surged, and the tide began to turn. Governments, once hesitant, started announcing plans to build infrastructure for hydrogen fueling stations. Auto manufacturers, once the fiercest critics, started reaching out to Tesla to discuss potential partnerships. Nick couldn't believe how quickly things were changing. What had started as a dream in his father's garage was now becoming a reality. The world was waking up, but there was still so much to do. The next challenge was scaling the technology, mass-producing the car, building the infrastructure, and ensuring that the global supply chain for water-powered vehicles could meet the growing demand. For Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk, this was just the beginning. The revolution they had started was only getting started. The public support for Nick Hamilton's water-powered car continued to soar after the press conference, and the tide was definitely turning in their favor. Elon Musk and Nick had faced many obstacles along the way, but now they were standing on the edge of a revolution. The world was watching, and they knew they had to capitalize on the momentum. But while the public's enthusiasm was undeniable, the battle was far from over. The oil companies and legacy automakers were not about to let a new technology like this wipe out their billions in profits without a fight. And the political powers that supported them were already preparing their counterattacks. Elon and Nick had the support of the people, but they needed more. They needed to push the water-powered car into mass production, and they needed to ensure that the world's governments and industries would embrace it. But there were forces out there working against them that had more power, money, and influence than they could possibly imagine. Nick was in Washington, D.C., meeting with government officials who were cautiously optimistic about the water-powered car. The technology had the potential to revolutionize the global energy market, but it also threatened entrenched industries, and political alliances were complicated. Some officials were genuinely excited about the car's potential to fight climate change, while others were deeply concerned about the potential economic fallout in states where oil production was a primary industry. Nick sat at a sleek conference table, trying to remain composed as the room filled with politicians and lobbyists, each one eager to weigh in on the technology. A senator from Texas, Senator Jameson, who had been a vocal critic of the water-powered car since the beginning, stood up to speak. "This technology is a pipe dream," Senator Jameson said, his voice filled with conviction. "It's not ready for prime time. We can't just abandon the oil and gas industries because of some flashy demonstrations. We need jobs. We need infrastructure. And most importantly, we need a technology that's been properly tested, not something that's built in a teenager's garage. Nick felt a jolt of anger, but kept his emotions in check. Elon had told him many times that in these situations, they had to focus on the facts. And the facts were on their side. The water-powered car had been thoroughly tested, and the science behind it was sound. The infrastructure to support it was possible. It just required a shift in priorities. Elon and I are not saying we should abandon oil or gas overnight, Nick interjected, his voice calm but firm. We're saying that we need to transition to a future that's sustainable. The technology exists, and it works. All we need is the will to make it happen. The senator looked unconvinced, and the room buzzed with murmurs. Nick knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he had no intention of backing down. As the political battle raged on, the oil companies were gearing up for a full-scale counteroffensive. Their lobbyists flooded the halls of Congress with millions of dollars in campaign donations, and their PR firms began running more aggressive TV ads. The oil industry's strategy was clear: attack the credibility of the water-powered car at every opportunity. One particularly damaging ad campaign showed a series of dramatic and exaggerated claims, using old footage of hydrogen explosions from incidents unrelated to Nick's technology to scare the public. Hydrogen cars are dangerous. Hydrogen is unstable, and it can cause catastrophic accidents. Do you want to risk your family's safety with this untested technology? The ad struck a nerve. Hydrogen was still a relatively unfamiliar fuel for the average person, and fear of the unknown was a powerful motivator. Even though Nick's technology used a safer form of hydrogen production, the ad campaign was effective at spreading doubt. Nick sat in front of the TV one night, watching the ad on loop, frustration bubbling inside him. It felt like they were being pushed backward with every new negative campaign. But he knew what he had to do next. "We can't keep reacting to these attacks," Elon said one evening, pacing around the Tesla lab. "We need to take the fight to them." Nick looked up from the workbench, his eyes focused on Elon. "What do you mean?" Elon stopped pacing and turned to face him. "We need a real-world demonstration, something that will make it impossible for anyone to ignore. We need to go to the oil fields themselves. We need to show the world that we can build the future, not just talk about it." Nick's heart raced. The idea was bold, even by Elon's standards. But he knew Elon was right. The only way to truly prove the technology was viable was to take it straight to the people who were fighting the hardest to keep things the way they were. The plan was set into motion. Elon and Nick announced a new initiative, Tesla's Water-Powered Challenge. They would drive the water-powered car straight into the heart of the oil industry, Texas, not just to give a demonstration, but to drive the car on the very land where oil was king, showing the world that water could fuel cars just as well as crude oil could. It was a risky move. Texas was home to some of the most powerful oil companies in the world. But the more they thought about it, the more it made sense. If the water-powered car could succeed in Texas, on its own turf, it could succeed anywhere. The media buzz around the announcement was intense. Headlines were filled with phrases like, "Tesla challenges big oil in their own backyard," and "water-powered car to face Texas oil giants in a battle for the future." It was clear that this wasn't just another press stunt. This was a battle for the future of energy. On the day of the challenge, Nick and Elon stood in front of a massive crowd outside a well-known Texas oil refinery. They were flanked by the Tesla team, reporters, and an eager audience. The stage was set for the showdown, and it felt like the weight of the world was on their shoulders. Nick climbed into the driver's seat of the water-powered car, and the crowd fell silent. He started the engine, and once again, the smooth hum of the hydrogen-powered motor filled the air. He took the car around the track, demonstrating its flawless performance. The crowd was amazed. It was clear that this wasn't just a gimmick. It was a legitimate breakthrough in transportation technology. But the real magic happened when Elon stepped up to the podium and addressed the crowd. "This is just the beginning. Today, we are not just demonstrating a car. We are demonstrating a future where we no longer depend on oil, a future where we can power our cars and our world with water. And we're doing it here, in the heart of the oil industry, because this is where the future begins." The response was deafening. The crowd erupted into applause, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the impossible had been achieved. They had proven that the water-powered car could not only work but could thrive in the very land where oil had ruled for decades. The success of the Tesla water-powered challenge sent shockwaves through the media and the energy industries. The oil companies had no choice but to acknowledge that the technology was real and that it posed a serious threat to their profits. Senator Jameson, once a staunch opponent of the technology, was now under increasing pressure to publicly support it. Some of the automakers who had initially dismissed the water-powered car were beginning to consider partnerships with Tesla, and governments were scrambling to develop regulations and infrastructure to support hydrogen-powered vehicles. Nick and Elon knew that the real battle was far from over. The road ahead would be full of obstacles, but for the first time, they felt confident that they could succeed. The water-powered car was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, and the future was looking brighter than ever. Do you think the oil companies will be able to stop the rise of the water-powered car, or is it too late for them to fight back? What do you think will be the next big challenge for Nick and Elon on their path to revolutionizing transportation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The fallout from the Texas challenge reverberated across the world. Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk had done what many thought impossible. They had taken the water-powered car straight to the heart of the oil industry and emerged victorious. But as the world celebrated the breakthrough, the real work was just beginning. Behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. The oil giants, automakers, and even some governments had begun to take drastic measures to slow down the water-powered revolution. They weren't going to give up their hold on the global energy market without a fight. And they had one weapon that could change everything: public perception. The next phase of the battle was psychological. The oil industry had a vast network of influence, and they were about to unleash it on the public in a way that would shake people's confidence in the new technology. A new campaign of fear-mongering began. Billboards and commercials flooded the airwaves, depicting nightmarish scenarios where hydrogen-powered cars exploded in flames, or worse, where hydrogen was somehow leaked into the environment and triggered disastrous chain reactions. News outlets, once supportive of the water-powered car, began running skeptical reports, often citing experts with questionable backgrounds and ties to fossil fuel industries. Nick and Elon were on the defensive. They knew the media was a powerful weapon, and the oil industry was using it to its full potential. Despite the scientific evidence supporting their technology, it was becoming harder to ignore the growing sense of doubt among the general public. Nick sat with Elon late one night in Tesla's strategy room, watching the latest commercial attack run on the screen. The footage showed a staged explosion of a hydrogen-powered car, complete with ominous music and exaggerated special effects. "We've got to do something about this," Nick said, his voice tight with frustration. "We've worked so hard to get here, and now they're trying to tear it all down." Elon nodded. "They want people to be afraid. Fear is their last defense. We've got to show them why they're wrong. It's time for something even bigger." Elon was always one to think big. As the media campaign against them intensified, he suggested a radical idea that could turn the tide once and for all: a global showcase event. This wouldn't be just another press conference or demonstration. Elon envisioned a live event, streamed worldwide, where the full potential of the water-powered car would be revealed, front and center, for billions to see. They would demonstrate the car's performance, safety features, and environmental benefits in a high-profile, real-world setting. "We need to invite the experts, the critics, the journalists, the politicians, and even the skeptics," Elon said. "We'll drive the car through cities with the worst air quality. We'll show them that we can clean up the world with this technology. And we'll do it on live television, for everyone to witness." Nick wasn't sure how they were going to pull it off, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized it was the only way to break through the public's growing distrust. This event could be the turning point they needed. The plan was set. The event would take place in New Delhi, India, one of the most polluted cities in the world. Known for its dense smog and poor air quality, New Delhi was an ideal location to demonstrate the effectiveness of a water-powered car in clearing up the environment. But this wouldn't be an easy feat. The city's streets were choked with traffic, and navigating through them would be a challenge for even the most experienced drivers. But Nick and Elon were undeterred. They knew the stakes were high. The event was announced with a great deal of fanfare. Invitations were sent to governments, major media outlets, environmental groups, and key industry players. The entire world would be watching as Nick drove the water-powered car through the smog-filled streets of New Delhi. For Nick, this was personal. He knew that the success or failure of this event could determine the future of the entire revolution. But he also knew that they couldn't back down now. The day of the event arrived, and the streets of New Delhi were filled with excitement. News crews from around the world set up their cameras, and reporters waited eagerly at the starting line. Nick was in the driver's seat once again, but this time, it wasn't just a test track. He was about to drive through the heart of one of the most polluted cities on Earth, showing the world just how clean a water-powered car could be. As he revved the engine, the crowd fell silent. The car, sleek and futuristic, hummed to life. Its smooth, near-silent operation was in stark contrast to the noisy, gas-guzzling vehicles around it. Nick pushed the car forward into the thick haze of smog that covered the city, and the challenge began. As he drove through the city's congested streets, the car's onboard sensors measured the air quality in real time, displaying the numbers on a screen for the public to see. The levels of pollutants in the air were alarming, but what followed next was even more remarkable. As Nick drove, the car's exhaust system began releasing water vapor. Not toxic emissions, but pure water, into the air. And something incredible began to happen. The surrounding air slowly started to clear. The pollutants that had once hung heavy in the atmosphere seemed to dissipate. It was as if the car was actively purifying the air with every mile it traveled. The crowd watched in awe as the transformation took place. The smog that had once made it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of them began to lift, and the air grew visibly clearer. The real-time readings on the screen confirmed it. The car wasn't just running, it was actively improving the environment. The media coverage was instantaneous. Cameras zoomed in on the crowds, who were gasping in disbelief. Social media exploded with hashtags like #WaterPoweredRevolution and #CleanAirNow. People from all over the world began sharing their amazement, and the video of the car driving through New Delhi went viral within hours. The car continued its journey through the city for nearly 2 hours, with the air quality improving steadily as it went. By the time Nick reached the finish line, the once unbearable smog had cleared significantly. The crowd erupted into applause, and reporters rushed to interview the team. In the days following the event, the narrative around the water-powered car began to shift. The fear-mongering ads from the oil companies seemed out of place now that people had seen the car's potential to clean the air, reduce pollution, and provide an alternative to fossil fuels. The tide had turned. Governments began making serious commitments to support the development of hydrogen infrastructure. Cities around the world started drafting plans to introduce water-powered cars to reduce their carbon footprints. Even major automakers, who had previously dismissed the technology, were now in talks with Tesla about potential collaborations. For Nick and Elon, it was a moment of triumph. The battle was far from over, but they had struck a blow that the opposition couldn't ignore. They had shown the world that the water-powered car wasn't just a technological marvel. It was the key to solving some of the planet's most urgent environmental problems. As the sun set over New Delhi, Nick and Elon stood side by side, watching the last of the media trucks leave the event. They had done it. They had proven that their vision wasn't just a pipe dream. It was the future. But the challenges were far from over. The world was changing, and Nick and Elon knew they had to continue pushing forward. The global race to create a sustainable future was just beginning, and there was still so much more work to be done. For Nick Hamilton, this was only the beginning of the revolution he had started. He had built the water-powered car, but the true battle was about to unfold. A battle not just for the future of transportation, but for the future of the planet. What do you think will be the next step in the water-powered revolution? How do you see this technology affecting the future of transportation and the environment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. After the groundbreaking global showcase in New Delhi, Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk felt the weight of their success, but they also knew that a new chapter of the battle was about to begin. The world had seen the potential of the water-powered car, clear air in real time, but the true test would be the widespread adoption of this new technology. The hardest fight was yet to come, convincing governments, corporations, and the global public to take the leap. Despite the overwhelming media coverage and the public's rising interest, the entrenched systems of power that depended on oil were not about to let go without a fight. Behind the scenes, The oil companies were regrouping, strategizing, and planning their next move. They knew that if the water-powered car succeeded, it could be the death knell for their industries. So, the war had moved into a new phase, a battle not for ideas, but for control. Back in Washington, D.C., Nick and Elon were about to face their biggest hurdle yet, lobbyist pressure from the fossil fuel industry. Despite the global success of the water-powered car, the political landscape remained heavily influenced by the powerful oil lobby. Senators and Congress members who had previously shown interest in clean energy suddenly began to backpedal, citing concerns over economic stability and job losses in the oil and gas sectors. Nick sat in a meeting with Elon and a few members of Tesla's legal and lobbying team, anxiously watching the news. A new bill had been introduced in Congress, called the Energy Security Act, which sought to increase subsidies for oil exploration and tighten regulations on alternative energy technologies like the water-powered car. The timing was no coincidence. "I knew they would come after us, but this fast?" Nick said, exasperated. Elon leaned back in his chair, his eyes focused on the screen. "It's a political maneuver. They're trying to force the conversation back to oil and gas. We've got to get ahead of them, counterattack, if you will." The problem was, the water-powered car was still new. Despite the live demonstrations and the breakthrough in New Delhi, large-scale production had yet to take off. The oil industry was betting that they could drown out public enthusiasm by making the technology seem untested, unreliable, or even unsafe. "I have an idea," Elon said, eyes lighting up. "We take our fight to Capitol Hill, not in the traditional way, but directly to the people. Let's put the water-powered car in the hands of everyday Americans. Let them drive it, use it, experience it. We can prove that it's ready for the masses, and that's how we win over the politicians." Elon's plan was ambitious, but it was simple: a nationwide road tour showcasing the water-powered car. They would drive the car through cities and towns across America, from the urban centers to the rural heartland. The goal was to allow people from all walks of life to experience the technology firsthand, to see how it could change their lives, and to turn the growing support for the car into a political force. Nick was all in. He knew that this kind of grassroots effort could be the tipping point they needed to sway public opinion and, in turn, the politicians. The road tour kicked off in Detroit, the heart of America's automotive industry. It was a symbolic start. If they could convince Detroit, they could convince anyone. The first stop was at the Detroit Auto Show, where Nick and Elon were met with a room full of industry giants. The mood was tense. These were the very companies whose dominance in the automotive world had been built on fossil fuels. Automakers like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler had long dominated the market, and they weren't about to let a teen and an eccentric billionaire with a hydrogen-powered car steal their thunder. Nick and Elon set up their demonstration in the heart of the convention, with media crews from around the world watching. The plan was straightforward: show the car's capabilities, show the clear air it produced, and let people get behind the wheel. But as they made their pitch to the audience, it was clear that the old guard wasn't ready to embrace the future. One of the senior executives from GM, a man in his late 50s named Robert Saunders, stood up, his voice dripping with skepticism. "This is nothing more than a flashy prototype. Where are the billions of dollars in investments needed to build infrastructure? Where are the safety standards? Where is the proof that this technology can work on a mass scale?" Nick kept his composure, but he could feel the weight of the challenge ahead. He was up against not just Robert Saunders, but an entire industry that had more resources and influence than they could ever hope to match. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of younger engineers from Ford, clearly excited about the possibility of a new future, approached the Tesla team after the demonstration. They weren't there to criticize, they wanted to learn. They were tired of working on outdated, polluting technologies, and they saw the water-powered car as a glimmer of hope. "We want to help," one of the engineers, Ava, said. "We've been trying to convince our executives that hydrogen fuel could be the future, but they're too focused on profits." Nick smiled, sensing that the younger generation might be the key to unlocking the automotive industry's resistance. "Then let's get them on board," he said. "We're not here to fight anyone. We're here to build the future together." As the tour continued, Nick and Elon encountered both skepticism and enthusiasm. In Chicago, they had their first breakthrough. At a packed press conference, a local journalist asked Nick a pointed question. How long before we can all drive one of these cars? Nick smiled. We're already working on mass production. We just need the support to make it happen. By the time they reached Denver, the public's excitement had reached a fever pitch. Social media was abuzz, and people from all over the country were showing up to see the car in person. The grassroots support was undeniable. In every city, there were lines around the block of people wanting to test drive the water-powered car. Some were just curious. Others were convinced this was the answer to the world's pollution problems. The media coverage grew as well. Reporters who had once dismissed the technology now lined up to ask questions, and the tone of the coverage began to shift from skepticism to genuine curiosity. Was this the future of transportation? The road tour culminated in a grand finale in Washington, D.C., the political capital of the world. Nick and Elon were scheduled to meet with several key senators, environmental activists, and industry leaders. It was the moment of truth. Would the overwhelming public support be enough to convince lawmakers to back the water-powered car? The event was held on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Thousands of people gathered, holding signs that read, "Clean air, clean cars, and the future is now." The atmosphere was electric. Nick stood on stage, his heart racing as he looked out at the crowd. "This is it," Elon whispered beside him. Nick stepped forward to the microphone. "We've traveled this country to show you what's possible. We've shown that the water-powered car is not just a dream. It's real, and it's ready. It's time to stop talking and start acting. We need your support to bring this technology to the world." The roar of applause was deafening. As Nick and Elon finished their speeches, they watched as the members of Congress slowly filed into the crowd, nodding in approval. It was a turning point. The water-powered car had gone from a risky idea to a global movement. With the support of the American public surging and a monumental rally in Washington, D.C., behind them, Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk thought they might have finally turned the corner. But, as they soon learned, the world of power and politics was not going to let the water-powered revolution unfold without a fight. The pressure on the movement increased, and the forces of resistance began to coalesce into a formidable foe. As the days passed after the rally, Elon and Nick began receiving ominous messages from anonymous sources, warnings, threats, and subtle hints that the road ahead would be much harder than they had anticipated. It wasn't just the entrenched oil industry that they had to worry about anymore. There were new and more shadowy forces at play. Behind closed doors, the oil barons, auto giants, and financial powerhouses who once dominated the global energy market were collaborating. Their primary concern wasn't just the water-powered car's impact on transportation, but on their entire economic ecosystem. The billions of dollars invested in oil infrastructure, refineries, pipelines, and even entire nations' economies were at stake. If the water-powered car succeeded, it could ripple through entire industries, airlines, shipping, energy production, transforming the very foundation of modern civilization. Their first strike was subtle: disinformation campaigns, anonymous accounts on social media, fake news websites, and even mainstream news outlets began spreading rumors. They claimed that the water-powered car was unsafe, that the technology was not ready for prime time, and that it could pose serious environmental risks. The attacks weren't just aimed at discrediting the car itself, but at undermining the credibility of Nick and Elon as leaders in the new energy revolution. On the surface, the media backlash seemed like another round of criticism from the corporate world, but it was more coordinated than it appeared. They had deep pockets, vast networks, and access to powerful lobbying groups. The final straw came in the form of an explosive news story, one that sent shockwaves across the media landscape: the explosion of a water-powered car in a small test market. The news was horrifying. The car, a prototype that had been in development for months, had reportedly caught fire during a routine test. The report included footage of emergency responders dousing the vehicle with water as plumes of smoke billowed into the sky. Experts were interviewed, warning about the potential dangers of hydrogen fuel and the volatility of water-powered systems. Nick sat in the Tesla offices, staring at the headline on his laptop screen: "Water-powered car explosion. Is it the future or the end?" Elon paced back and forth in the room, running a hand through his hair. "This is bad. They're going to try to use this against us. We have to act fast." Nick's mind raced. He knew the stakes. The incident could have been an accident, a malfunction, a faulty prototype, but the narrative that was being spun by the media, with its ominous headlines and expert opinions, painted a very different picture. This was their worst fear realized. The technology was now being labeled as dangerous, unreliable, and untested. Elon quickly assembled a team of engineers, scientists, and public relations experts to investigate the incident. They would have to not only uncover the truth, but also make sure they could control the narrative before it spiraled out of control. The truth was more complicated than anyone could have expected. The test car that exploded wasn't even one of their own prototypes. It was an imitation produced by a rogue third-party manufacturer who had attempted to reverse engineer the technology without Tesla's oversight. It wasn't a true water-powered car. It was a Frankenstein version that used hydrogen as a secondary fuel source, leading to a catastrophic failure. But the damage had already been done. The media had sensationalized the incident, and even though the truth came to light, it didn't matter. The story was already out there, and public trust was shaken. People began to wonder, was the water-powered car really safe? Nick watched helplessly as the company's stock price began to plummet. Media outlets continued to question the car's reliability, and politicians who had once shown support started distancing themselves from the controversial technology. Even those who had rallied behind them were now hesitant, unwilling to back something that was deemed dangerous by public perception. With the water-powered car's future hanging in the balance, Elon and Nick knew they had to make a bold move to reclaim public trust. But they needed something more than a press release or an engineering report. They needed a personal appeal, something that would cut through the noise and speak directly to the hearts of the people. Elon came up with an idea, a live-streamed public demonstration, one that would put the technology to the ultimate test in front of millions. This wasn't just about showing that the technology worked. It was about showing that they, the creators of the car, were willing to stand behind their vision, no matter the odds. Nick was hesitant at first. "You want us to drive the car live, after everything that's happened?" Elon nodded. "Yes. We need to show the world that we believe in this, no matter the risk. We need to be as transparent as possible. We'll answer questions live. Let people ask us anything. We'll show them why they can trust us." And so, it was decided. They would schedule a global, live-streamed event from the heart of Silicon Valley. It would take place in Tesla's largest testing facility, and people from around the world could tune in to watch the test firsthand. The event would feature a real-world driving test of the car, followed by a Q&A session where Elon, Nick, and the engineering team would answer the toughest questions from the public. The day of the event arrived, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Elon and Nick stood together in front of a sleek, newly manufactured water-powered car, ready to show the world what their technology could really do. The cameras were rolling, the global audience was waiting, and the tension in the air was palpable. Elon stepped forward first. "Today, we're going to show you exactly how safe and reliable this car is," he said, looking into the camera. "We know that trust is earned, and we're here to earn it again. We've built this car with one goal in mind, to help solve the energy crisis and clean up our planet." Nick took the driver's seat, heart pounding as he prepared to drive the car on a challenging, obstacle-filled course designed to test its durability, safety, and performance. The crowd watched, and the livestream audience grew into the millions. Nick revved the engine. The car hummed to life, its powerful yet quiet motor pushing it forward as he navigated tight turns, hills, and rough terrain. The test was grueling, designed to push the limits of the water-powered car. But as Nick completed the course and drove across the finish line, there was no explosion, no malfunction. The car had performed flawlessly. The air quality around the test site had improved dramatically, and the car had run without a hitch. Elon then stepped forward to answer the questions. The first one came from a tough journalist. "How can we be sure this technology is safe after the explosion in the prototype? How can we trust that this isn't just another dangerous gimmick?" Elon replied confidently, "What happened with the prototype was not our car, but a knockoff. We've had our engineers work tirelessly to perfect this technology. This car you saw today is built to the highest standards. We are confident in its safety, and we are committed to transparency. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that we can't afford to hide anything." The demonstration was a resounding success. The real-time test, the transparency, and the clear performance of the water-powered car restored confidence in the technology. The audience watched as the skepticism melted away, replaced by a new sense of hope and optimism. The next day, major news outlets began reporting on the event. The headlines read, "Water-powered car passes tough test with flying colors," and "Elon Musk and Nick Hamilton prove the future is now." Social media was flooded with positive comments, with people from around the world praising the car's performance and the team's commitment to transparency. But as Nick and Elon celebrated their victory, they knew this was just another step in the journey. The road ahead was still long, and the battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, the water-powered revolution was back on track. The momentum was swinging back in Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk's favor. After their daring public demonstration, the water-powered car had regained its credibility. The backlash, though intense, had not been fatal. Public interest was higher than ever, and pressure on the government and global corporations had only increased. But despite their victories, Nick and Elon knew that the hardest part was still ahead of them. The oil industry wasn't about to surrender without a fight. It had already unleashed disinformation campaigns, and now they were prepared for their next, more insidious tactic: legal warfare. As Nick and Elon prepared for the final push to bring the water-powered car to the masses, a legal team representing Global Petroleum Corporation, GPC, the largest oil conglomerate in the world, filed a massive class action lawsuit against Tesla and the entire water-powered car movement. The lawsuit, filed under the banner of consumer safety, accused Tesla and Nick Hamilton's invention of misleading the public, claiming that the water-powered car was unsafe, unproven, and could pose a danger to consumers if mass-produced. Nick felt a wave of panic. The car had passed every safety test. It had performed flawlessly in the live-streamed demonstration. And yet here they were, fighting a legal battle that could delay the rollout for years, maybe even destroy the company. Elon's usual calm demeanor began to fray at the edges. "This isn't about the technology anymore," he said, pacing in the war room. "This is about buying time. They know the clock is ticking, and they want to drag this out as long as possible. If they can tie us up in court for years, they can crush the momentum. It's the same old playbook." Nick rubbed his temples, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. "So, what do we do now?" Elon looked at him, his expression hardening. "We fight back. We go straight for the heart of the attack." Elon's plan was bold, risky, but potentially game-changing. Instead of retreating into the courtroom, they would counterattack by opening up the entire legal process to public scrutiny. They would leak key documents and have live-streamed courtroom appearances where the public could witness firsthand how the fossil fuel giants were trying to suppress the technology. Elon's thinking was simple. If they could make the legal battle public, turn it into a spectacle, they could rally the public against the oil companies and expose the truth. Transparency would become their most powerful weapon. Nick wasn't so sure. "You want to make the courtroom battle a public spectacle? You're talking about court documents being aired on CNN. This could backfire. We could look like we're just trying to turn this into a circus." But Elon's resolve was unwavering. "If we don't do this, we lose. If we don't make it clear to the world that these companies are using every dirty trick in the book, then they'll just bury us in paperwork and keep the truth hidden." The day of the trial arrived, and it was unlike any courtroom case the world had ever seen. The trial was broadcast live, with cameras in every corner of the courtroom. Millions tuned in as Nick Hamilton, Elon Musk, and their legal team sat across from representatives from Global Petroleum Corporation. For the first time in history, a battle over energy technology wasn't being fought in boardrooms or behind closed doors. It was being fought in front of the world. The courtroom became a global stage, with each witness brought in to testify not just about the technology, but about the interests that were trying to prevent it from succeeding. The first witness for the defense was a seasoned corporate attorney for GPC, who attempted to paint the water-powered car as a dangerous, untested technology. He tried to convince the public that it was a wild gamble that shouldn't be trusted with people's lives. But as he spoke, Elon and Nick's legal team began to dismantle his arguments one by one. First, they brought in Dr. Elena Michaels, one of the leading hydrogen fuel cell engineers in the world, who had worked directly on the development of the water-powered car. She explained the extensive testing, the rigorous safety protocols, and the years of research that had gone into perfecting the technology. "You want to know if it's safe?" Dr. Michaels said, her voice steady but passionate. It's safer than anything you've ever driven. The water-powered car isn't just a technological breakthrough. It's a clean energy revolution. And I can guarantee that if we don't act now, we risk losing this opportunity to the very companies that want to keep polluting our planet. The courtroom was silent. Then came the game changer. Elon Musk, known for his unconventional approach to just about everything, decided to take the stand. With millions watching from around the world, he looked directly into the cameras and gave a speech that would go down in history. This lawsuit isn't about the safety of our technology, Elon said, his voice calm yet forceful. It's about control. The fossil fuel industry is trying to maintain their monopoly over energy, and they will do whatever it takes to keep us dependent on oil and gas. We know that the water-powered car works. We know it's safe. And the only reason we're in this courtroom today is because the old guard is scared of a world where clean, renewable energy becomes the norm. The final day of the trial was a tense one. The public, who had been watching the drama unfold in real time, were on edge. It seemed as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for the verdict that would decide not just the fate of the water-powered car, but the future of energy itself. Nick and Elon sat side by side, watching as the judge delivered his ruling. "I've heard the arguments," the judge began, his voice measured but resolute. "And I've considered the testimonies of the experts. The evidence is clear. The water-powered car is not just a feasible technology, it's a safe, revolutionary advancement. The lawsuit is dismissed." The courtroom erupted in applause, but it was nothing compared to the celebration that unfolded outside. People from around the world took to the streets, celebrating the victory. The future of energy had just been secured, and it was powered by water. Elon and Nick stood in the hallway of the courthouse, sharing a quiet moment of relief. "We did it," Nick said, his voice filled with disbelief. Elon nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "We did. But this is just the beginning." The courtroom victory marked a monumental turning point for Nick Hamilton, Elon Musk, and their revolutionary water-powered car. But while the legal battle was over, the real war had just begun. The world was watching, and the global energy landscape was shifting in ways no one could have predicted. The question now was whether they could turn this momentum into a global movement. As the dust settled from the trial, the voices of millions of citizens began to rise in unison, demanding cleaner, more sustainable alternatives to fossil fuels. The water-powered car was no longer just a bold idea. It was now a symbol of the world's desire for change. A week after the trial's conclusion, the United Nations convened an emergency summit on climate change, energy, and the future of transportation. It was unprecedented, a gathering of world leaders, scientists, activists, and environmentalists, all focused on the same issue: the urgent need to transition away from fossil fuels. The summit wasn't merely a talking shop. This was a place where tangible decisions would be made, and global policy would shift in real time. The water-powered car was on everyone's mind. The media coverage was intense, and global leaders were feeling the pressure to show they were committed to real action. Nick and Elon, along with a team of top engineers and climate scientists, were invited to present at the summit. The task before them was monumental: convince the world's governments to embrace the water-powered car technology as a central pillar of future transportation infrastructure. Nick Hamilton stood before the assembly of global leaders in the main hall of the UN. The air was thick with anticipation, and the weight of history seemed to rest on his shoulders. Behind him, a giant screen displayed footage of the water-powered car in action, driving through bustling city streets, zipping through dense traffic with ease, and finally stopping on a mountain road, where the car's hydrogen fuel system created no emissions, only clean water vapor. He took a deep breath. This was it. Honorable leaders, esteemed colleagues, and citizens of the world, Nick began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Today, we stand at a crossroads in history. The technology that we have developed in our labs and test sites has the power to reshape the world as we know it. The water-powered car is not just a means of transportation. It is a symbol of hope, a symbol of the future we can build together. Nick's words echoed through the hall, carrying a sense of optimism that had been lacking for so long. We can no longer afford to wait. Every moment we delay is a moment where the planet suffers and future generations are robbed of their chance to live in a cleaner, healthier world. This car, this technology, is ready. We are ready. But we need you to act. There was a long pause. Then, one by one, the representatives began to speak, many with cautious optimism. The debate was heated, with some leaders skeptical of the shift away from oil and gas, and others advocating for urgent action. But Nick's compelling vision had planted a seed. After Nick's presentation, it was Elon's turn to speak. The world knew Elon as a visionary, someone unafraid to take on impossible challenges. This time, he was more serious than ever. "I'm not here just to show you a new technology," Elon began, his tone resolute. "I'm here to propose a global initiative, a global transition fund to help shift the world's energy infrastructure from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. This fund will not only support the production of the water-powered car on a global scale, but also finance the creation of new, sustainable transportation networks. Imagine a world where the oil rigs of the past are replaced with solar fields, wind farms, and clean hydrogen production plants." The room fell silent as Elon's proposal sank in. The idea was ambitious, but it wasn't just about the water-powered car. It was about building the infrastructure that would make it possible for the entire world to decarbonize its transportation sector. "This isn't just a one-off technology," Elon continued. "This is a global effort, and it will require all of us, governments, businesses, citizens, to work together. The cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of transition. And if we act now, we can make sure that future generations inherit a world that's not just livable, but sustainable." The response was mixed, but there was no denying the momentum. World leaders from nations such as India, Germany, and Brazil stood up to pledge their support for the proposal, emphasizing the importance of global cooperation in tackling climate change. Countries like the United States and China, which had been slower to adopt bold measures, began to take more cautious but significant steps towards supporting the initiative. Meanwhile, the oil giants were watching from the sidelines, their grip on the global stage slowly loosening. It was clear that the days of unchecked corporate power were numbered, and they were desperate to regain control. But it wasn't just the governments of the world that were watching. Ordinary citizens, too, were beginning to take action. Social media erupted with calls for clean energy solutions, and protests and demonstrations supporting the transition to a sustainable future became more common in major cities around the world. In the weeks following the UN summit, the Global Transition Fund was officially established, with an initial pledge of billions of dollars from governments and private investors alike. Nick Hamilton's company, working closely with Elon Musk's Tesla and other leading innovators in sustainable technology, began ramping up the production of water-powered cars. Factory lines were established across the world, starting in the United States, China, and Europe. The production process was scaled rapidly, as Tesla and partner companies worked to produce enough cars to meet global demand. By the end of the year, the first mass-produced water-powered cars began to roll off the assembly line. The world's first commercial fleet of zero-emissions vehicles was ready. It was a moment that had seemed impossible just a year earlier, an entirely new mode of transportation powered by nothing but water. The impact of the water-powered car was immediate. Within months, oil consumption began to plummet as more and more drivers switched to the new clean vehicles. Countries that had long relied on oil exports to fuel their economies saw a sharp decline in revenue, but they also realized the need to transition to more sustainable sources of income. Many began to invest heavily in clean energy infrastructure, including solar, wind, and hydrogen fuel production. Cities worldwide began to redesign themselves. Air pollution levels dropped dramatically, and traffic jams became a thing of the past as the clean vehicles took over the roads. People no longer had to worry about rising gas prices. They only had to think about recharging their cars with water, a symbol of abundance, not scarcity. But the ripple effect didn't stop at transportation. As the world embraced clean energy, entire industries began to transform. From green architecture to clean manufacturing and sustainable agriculture, the way the world operated began to change fundamentally. It was clear now that the water-powered car had sparked something far larger than just a technological revolution. It was a movement, a global awakening to the reality that a cleaner, more sustainable future was within reach. And it was just the beginning. Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk stood together on the balcony of Tesla's new headquarters, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the skyline. The world had changed. They had changed it. "We did it," Nick said, his voice filled with awe. Elon nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We did. But the real work is just beginning." And with that, the two men turned back to their work, knowing that the future they had dreamed of was finally here. And it was built on the promise of clean water and a brighter tomorrow. What do you think the future holds now that the world has embraced clean, sustainable transportation? How will these changes affect your life? And what other innovations are you most excited about? Share your thoughts below. With the mass adoption of the water-powered car, the world was no longer the same. The roads were cleaner, the air fresher, and the world was stepping into a new era of sustainable technology. But as with any revolution, the rise of new ideas brought both excitement and fear. The water-powered car had opened doors to endless possibilities, but it also raised new challenges and uncertainties. While Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk celebrated their success, they knew that keeping the momentum going was not going to be easy. The giants of old, oil companies, automakers, and even some governments, would not go quietly into the night. They would adapt, fight back, and attempt to cling to their dominance over the world's energy systems. The first sign that things were about to take a dark turn came when a series of mysterious technical failures began to plague water-powered cars in several countries. Initially, these issues appeared to be isolated. Minor glitches in the software, faulty components, and unexplained performance drops. However, it didn't take long for the media to start connecting the dots. Soon, widespread reports flooded the news. Dozens of vehicles, across multiple markets, were experiencing unexplained malfunctions. Nick sat in a high-level meeting with Elon and the Tesla engineering team. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was trying to piece together what had happened. "We've done all the tests. The system works perfectly under normal conditions," Elon said, frustration evident in his voice. "So what's going wrong?" Nick narrowed his eyes. "What if someone is sabotaging the technology? The oil companies have a lot at stake here. They're not just going to sit back and let us destroy their monopoly without a fight." Elon's gaze shifted as he considered the possibility. "You're right, but we need proof. Without proof, all we have is paranoia." Nick was initially hesitant. The idea of going public with classified files, documents that could be used against them in a court of law, was risky, but he knew that they had no other choice. "We've already got the world's attention," Nick said. "Now we need to show them what these companies have been doing in the shadows." The two of them, along with their team, carefully crafted a global exposé. They would reveal everything: the files from the whistleblower, the financial transactions, the names of the corrupt officials, and most importantly, the deliberate attempts to undermine the technology that could save the planet. Elon called a press conference and announced that they would be releasing a full report on the sabotage campaign. Within hours, the world's media was buzzing with anticipation. This would be more than just a typical press release. It would be a game-changer. When the exposé went live, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets across the globe picked up the story, and the public outcry was deafening. Social media erupted in anger, as millions of people took to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to share their shock and disgust at the revelations. Politicians who had previously been hesitant to support the water-powered technology were now scrambling to distance themselves from the fossil fuel giants. Environmental groups, who had always been vocal advocates for clean energy, rallied behind the movement, calling for immediate investigations into the companies involved in the sabotage. The momentum was unstoppable. A massive global boycott of GPC and its subsidiaries began to take shape, and consumers around the world started to demand action. It was clear now that this was no longer just a battle between two companies. It was a battle between the future and the past. But the oil companies were not about to go down without a fight. Global Petroleum Corporation and its allies mounted a fierce counterattack, using PR campaigns, legal threats, and even covert tactics to try and discredit Nick, Elon, and their companies. They flooded the media with their own alternative facts, attempting to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the evidence Nick and Elon had released. They hired teams of cyber experts to try and hack into their systems and discredit the data. But despite their efforts, the truth had already taken root in the public consciousness. The oil companies' influence was beginning to fade, and the momentum for clean energy had reached a tipping point. Governments across the world, pressured by their citizens, began to draft laws that would phase out fossil fuels over the next 2 decades and prioritize clean, sustainable energy sources. As the battle raged on, there was no denying that Nick Hamilton, Elon Musk, and their water-powered car had ignited a global movement, one that would continue to push humanity toward a cleaner, more sustainable future. The oil companies, though powerful, could no longer hold back the tide of change. Months later, after legal battles, corporate backlashes, and social unrest, the water-powered car became the global standard. Fossil fuel-powered vehicles were phased out in favor of clean energy alternatives, and the world began to see the first signs of what had once seemed impossible, a carbon-neutral society. Nick and Elon stood together, watching the sunrise over a world transformed. Their work was far from over, but they had laid the foundation for a future where technology, innovation, and sustainability could coexist. "We did it," Nick said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Elon smiled. "The real work has just begun." And with that, they turned toward the future, where water, not oil, would fuel the world. The world had changed. Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk, against all odds, had not only exposed the sabotage of the water-powered car but had catalyzed an energy revolution that was sweeping across the globe. The concept of sustainable energy was no longer just a distant dream. It was happening. People were starting to realize that clean energy was not just possible, it was inevitable. But the challenges were far from over. As the water-powered car began to gain ground, the global infrastructure needed to change at an unprecedented pace. It wasn't just about producing enough clean vehicles, it was about completely overhauling the way the world thought about energy production, transportation, and even city design. Nick and Elon stood at the crossroads of a movement that had the potential to reshape humanity's future. But the work ahead was just as daunting as it was inspiring. As the adoption of water-powered vehicles surged, countries around the world began investing heavily in hydrogen production, solar power, and other renewable energy sources. A global push for energy independence was underway, as nations began to realize that they could no longer afford to rely on fossil fuels. The old guard, the oil and gas giants, were scrambling to adapt or be left behind. Nick watched as the world he had always dreamed of began to take shape. "It's happening," he said to Elon one evening, as they watched the sunset from a terrace overlooking Tesla's new headquarters in Silicon Valley. "People are waking up." Elon smiled, but there was an edge to his expression. "It's happening faster than we thought. And that's why we need to act now. We can't afford to wait for others to catch up. We have to lead this charge, Nick. It's our responsibility to make sure that the next generation doesn't just survive, they thrive." Nick nodded in agreement. He understood the stakes all too well. The water-powered car wasn't just a new mode of transportation. It was a symbol of something bigger, humanity's ability to innovate its way out of a crisis. But the global revolution was far from smooth. In some countries, climate change deniers and vested interests continued to spread misinformation about clean energy, trying to slow progress and maintain their grip on power. Governments, corporations, and environmental activists clashed as the world struggled to find the right balance between rapid innovation and social responsibility. Nick and Elon knew that they couldn't win this battle alone. They needed allies, governments, corporations, and even activist groups that had fought for years to push sustainable energy to the forefront. One of their first moves was to reach out to global environmental organizations, as well as leaders in the renewable energy sector, to create a unified front. The idea was simple. They needed to build a coalition of the willing, a global network that would push governments to implement stricter climate policies and incentivize the adoption of clean technologies. Elon's charisma and influence helped bring together influential figures, from government leaders to the CEOs of major corporations, including Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, and Richard Branson. They were all united by one simple truth: the world's future was tied to the success of clean, sustainable energy. The question now was not whether the transition would happen, but how fast. But not everyone was on board. The fossil fuel lobby had grown desperate, pouring money into a new wave of anti-sustainability propaganda. From fake news stories to lobbying efforts aimed at weakening environmental regulations, these companies were determined to slow down the inevitable shift. They targeted everything from green tech startups to government policies aimed at increasing subsidies for clean energy. It was clear that the battle for the future would not be won by innovation alone. It would require a concerted, multi-front war. The future of energy wasn't just being shaped in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley or in the halls of Washington, D.C. It was being fought on social media platforms, in the courtrooms, and in the streets. To turn the tide in their favor, Nick, Elon, and their coalition decided to hold a global summit on clean energy, bringing together world leaders, industry experts, and advocates from every corner of the planet. The goal was simple: unite the world in a singular mission to transition to sustainable energy and ensure that this new technology became the global standard. The summit was to be held in New York City, and its reach would be global. Using cutting-edge virtual technology, leaders from across the world could participate in real time. But the stakes were high. If the summit failed, there was a real chance that the climate crisis would become an irreparable disaster for future generations. Nick and Elon took center stage at the event, addressing the crowd in the United Nations headquarters. "We are at a turning point," Elon began. "The future of our planet is no longer a matter of scientific debate. It is a matter of political and economic will. The water-powered car is a small part of a much larger solution. It's not just a technology. It's a symbol of what humanity can achieve when we embrace innovation and work together." Nick took the mic, his voice full of emotion. "For too long, we've allowed our world to be dictated by a few powerful industries. But we have the chance to change that. We have the chance to build a future that is not just clean, but also just and equitable. We are here today to take the first step toward that future." The crowd erupted in applause. The air in the room felt electric, charged with the energy of a movement that had grown too big to be ignored. As the summit came to a close, the world had made a clear commitment. The era of fossil fuels was over. Governments pledged to enact carbon-neutral policies, businesses promised to invest in clean energy alternatives, and individuals everywhere rallied behind the cause. The shift had begun in earnest. Nick and Elon knew that the work wasn't over, though. It was only just beginning. The global rollout of the water-powered car was only the start. There was still the matter of building out clean energy grids, transitioning industrial sectors to sustainable manufacturing, and solving the pressing issue of global climate justice. Nick's focus was now on creating a global network of clean energy infrastructure, from refueling stations to hydrogen plants, solar farms, and wind fields. This network would be the backbone of a new, sustainable world. Elon, as always, was thinking ahead. He had already begun discussions about space-based solar energy, a long-term project that could provide clean energy to the Earth from space. If successful, this would mark the final frontier of clean energy innovation and would solidify humanity's place in the future. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges. But Nick and Elon were no strangers to adversity. Together, they had built something impossible, and now they were poised to build something even more revolutionary. A world that was truly sustainable, just, and free from the chains of fossil fuel dependency. Months later, as Nick stood at the forefront of a new generation of global leaders, he realized something profound. The water-powered car had sparked not just a revolution in technology, but a revolution in human consciousness. People were finally starting to believe that anything was possible, that the future was not something that just happened to them, but something they could shape with their own hands. And as the world embraced a new age of innovation and hope, Nick couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long, but they were finally on the cusp of a new era, a better world for everyone, powered by the very essence of life itself, water. The dust had settled after the global summit, and the world had collectively begun to shift toward a cleaner, more sustainable future. The success of the water-powered car was undeniable, but Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The true challenge now lay in turning the momentum of innovation into long-lasting global change. The ripple effect from the summit was palpable. What started as a small but daring breakthrough in automotive technology had become the catalyst for a global transformation in how the world approached energy, industry, and the environment. Nick was now a global icon. His story of innovation and perseverance had captured the world's imagination. But he had no intention of resting on his laurels. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with obstacles and hard choices. One of Nick's first moves after the summit was to strengthen the Global Clean Energy Coalition. The coalition had proven to be a powerful force in the shift toward clean energy, but Nick knew that keeping it cohesive and focused on the greater good would be a challenge. There were too many competing interests at the table, and too many entrenched powers who were reluctant to relinquish control. But Nick was relentless. He worked tirelessly to keep the coalition united by constantly reminding its members of the long-term vision. A world powered by clean, sustainable energy, where fossil fuels were phased out and the planet's health was restored. "I know that change isn't easy," Nick said during one of the coalition's quarterly meetings, "but we can no longer afford to wait. The world has already made its choice. The question is, will we move fast enough to meet it?" The coalition's members, which included leaders from governments, NGOs, environmental groups, and the private sector, were united in their commitment. They knew they were on the cusp of something monumental. The global energy transition would be a challenge, but it was a challenge worth taking on. As the clean energy revolution gained momentum, the backlash from the fossil fuel industry became more pronounced. The lobbying campaigns from oil giants like Global Petroleum Corporation, GPC, and ExxonMobil were relentless. They were well-funded and skilled at shaping public opinion. In some countries, especially in oil-rich nations, governments were still heavily influenced by fossil fuel money. Resistance came in the form of anti-renewable energy propaganda, misleading legal challenges, and even covert sabotage aimed at undermining the progress made by Nick and Elon. But Nick wasn't one to back down. He knew that the only way to win was to fight fire with fire, innovation with innovation. "Let them play their games," Nick said to Elon one evening as they sat in Tesla's new operations center. "While they're still trying to drag us into the past, we'll keep moving forward. We'll make the future look so bright that they won't be able to ignore it." With the success of the water-powered car firmly established, Nick turned his attention to the next frontier of clean energy innovation. Tesla and his other companies were now working on several exciting projects that promised to revolutionize industries beyond transportation. One of the most exciting developments was hydrogen storage, a technology that could store and transport hydrogen energy more efficiently and affordably than ever before. Hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, had the potential to become the cleanest and most versatile fuel on the planet. If Nick and his team could crack the problem of hydrogen storage, it could be the missing link in the global energy puzzle. Elon was particularly excited about this breakthrough. "If we can make hydrogen storage as simple as charging an electric car, we'll have the energy to power everything: cars, homes, industries, even airplanes. And it'll all be clean." Nick couldn't help but agree. The potential was staggering. This wasn't just about replacing gas with water. It was about redefining the way the world produced and consumed energy. With hydrogen storage in place, entire sectors, from transportation to agriculture to manufacturing, could be powered by clean energy, leading to a dramatic reduction in carbon emissions and global pollution. And they weren't stopping there. They were also working on solar energy breakthroughs, cheaper, more efficient solar panels that could be seamlessly integrated into every home and every building. The goal was clear. They didn't just want to disrupt the automobile industry or even the energy sector. They wanted to transform the entire global economy, making clean energy the backbone of a new, sustainable world. The effects of this technological shift were beginning to be felt far beyond the realms of business and politics. The clean energy revolution was creating new opportunities for millions of people. It was driving job creation in new industries, spurring innovation in education and technology, and even opening up opportunities for global collaboration. Nick was particularly proud of the social impact that clean energy was having. In many developing nations, access to cheap and reliable clean energy meant that people no longer had to rely on polluting and expensive fossil fuels. Rural communities were now able to power hospitals, schools, and homes with solar energy, improving lives and saving money. Nick saw the potential to not just change industries, but to lift millions out of poverty. "It's not just about saving the planet," Nick said during an interview with a global news outlet. "It's about giving people access to the tools and resources they need to thrive. This technology can empower the disempowered, create a more equitable world, and change the way we think about progress." Despite the tremendous progress, the world was still deeply divided. While clean energy was gaining traction in some regions, other parts of the world were still entrenched in the old ways. Governments in some areas, especially those that depended heavily on fossil fuel exports, were resisting the transition. In these countries, climate change was still a political debate, and renewable energy was viewed as a threat to their economic stability. To make matters worse, misinformation about climate science was still being pushed by media outlets with ties to the fossil fuel industry. Nick knew that winning this battle required more than just technological solutions. It required unity. People, no matter where they came from, had to recognize that the transition to clean energy was not just an environmental issue. It was a human issue. "We can't let the world be divided over this," Nick told Elon. "This is about our collective survival. We have to show people that we're in this together." Elon agreed. "It's time to start thinking about this as a global effort, not just a national one. The world has to come together. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to reverse the damage." Nick and Elon were committed to continuing their mission. They knew the work ahead would be incredibly challenging. It would take decades to fully transition the world to a sustainable, carbon-neutral future. But they were unwavering in their vision. As the years passed, more and more countries began to phase out fossil fuels and prioritize clean energy solutions. Hydrogen and solar power became the new standards for energy production, and the world began to heal. The economy was thriving in a new way, one that was focused on sustainability, equity, and technological innovation. Nick and Elon knew they had started something monumental. But it wasn't just their work. It was the work of everyone who had joined the cause. The ripple effect of the clean energy revolution was continuing to grow, expanding the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. And as Nick looked out over the horizon, the sun rising over a world that was slowly but surely turning greener, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They were on the right side of history, and together, they had shown the world that change was not just possible, it was inevitable. The momentum for the clean energy revolution was undeniable, but as Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk knew all too well, progress was never linear. For every leap forward, there were setbacks, challenges, and obstacles that had to be overcome. The world was slowly transforming, but the pace of change often felt like it was moving too slowly in comparison to the urgency of the climate crisis. The initial success of the water-powered car and the rapid adoption of renewable energy technologies had sparked hope across the globe, but deep-rooted systemic resistance, from governments to corporations to even everyday people, was an ever-present reality. While some nations embraced the new energy future with open arms, others resisted, clinging to their dependence on fossil fuels for economic and political reasons. Nick and Elon had expected opposition, but the size and complexity of the fight were becoming clearer with each passing day. What had started as a promising technological revolution was now entangled in the messy world of geopolitics, corporate interests, and social divides. The fossil fuel industry, still one of the most profitable sectors in the world, was fighting back with everything it had. As oil prices dropped, traditional energy companies saw their profits shrink, and many turned to more aggressive methods to protect their dominance. From lobbying governments to running smear campaigns against renewable energy, they used their enormous financial resources to maintain their hold on global energy markets. For Nick, this was a frustrating but expected challenge. As he sat in his office late one evening, he couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The water-powered car and other clean energy technologies had already shown the world what was possible, but the infrastructure needed to make these changes permanent was still lacking. Elon walked in, as usual, exuding his trademark optimism. "What's bothering you, Nick?" he asked, taking a seat across from him. "It's the pace," Nick admitted. "We've made incredible strides. We've shifted the conversation, gotten governments on board, and pushed for innovation like we've never seen before. But there's still so much work to do. The oil companies are fighting harder than I thought, and the political landscape is still so divided. Some people still see us as a threat." Elon leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "The old guard will always fight to preserve its power. But think about this, we've already won. The world knows that clean energy is the future. All we need to do now is make sure we have the infrastructure, the policies, and the global cooperation to make it a reality. These setbacks are just part of the journey." Nick nodded slowly. Elon was right. The hard work was still ahead, But the vision was clear. They couldn't afford to get discouraged. The world needed them now more than ever. One of the biggest hurdles they faced was the divide between developed and developing nations. While many wealthy countries had the resources to transition quickly to renewable energy, others, especially those in the global south, were still struggling with basic issues like poverty, access to clean water, and energy poverty. In countries where fossil fuels were deeply intertwined with economic development, there was a fierce debate over the cost of transitioning to cleaner energy. For many governments, the fear was that pushing too hard on climate policy would harm their economies and hinder development. "We can't ignore them, Nick," Elon said as they discussed the global divide in their weekly meeting. "We have to ensure that the clean energy revolution doesn't leave anyone behind." Nick agreed. But how do we bring them into the fold? These countries need affordable energy solutions, something that works for their people. The infrastructure we have in place today doesn't work for them. It's too expensive, too complicated. The answer, they realized, lay in affordable, scalable technologies. The water-powered car was a prime example of what could be done when people focused on solving real-world problems. But in order for this to work on a global scale, they needed solutions that could be easily adopted by all nations, regardless of their economic status. They began working with international organizations and local governments to introduce microgrids and solar-powered solutions in developing nations. By making clean energy affordable and accessible, they could help these countries leapfrog the old, polluting energy systems and move directly into the sustainable future. Hydrogen had been touted as the next big thing in the energy revolution. It was a clean fuel, abundant in nature, and capable of being used across a wide variety of industries, from transportation to heavy manufacturing to space exploration. Nick and Elon were both deeply invested in making hydrogen a mainstream energy source, but there was one major problem: storage and transportation. Hydrogen, while abundant, was difficult to store. It needed to be kept at very high pressures, or in liquid form at extremely low temperatures. This made it costly and technically challenging to transport and distribute. The solution, Nick knew, lay in advanced materials that could make hydrogen storage cheaper and more efficient. Tesla's research labs were already working on innovative storage methods, but progress was slow. And as more companies jumped on the hydrogen bandwagon, the competition for breakthroughs in hydrogen storage became fierce. Nick wasn't one to back down from a challenge, though. He dove headfirst into the problem, bringing in experts from around the world to help solve it. "If we can crack this," he said during one of the brainstorming sessions, "hydrogen will be the key to solving the global energy crisis. It's the fuel of the future, and we need to make sure it's as easy to use as gasoline." Elon, always the optimist, added, "We've solved tough problems before. This is just another one. We'll get there." But deep down, both men knew that the clock was ticking. The world was depending on their success. Despite the setbacks, the team at Tesla and Nick's network of collaborators across the globe continued to push forward. Their collective efforts were starting to pay off. After months of experimentation, they finally achieved a breakthrough in hydrogen storage, a system that was more efficient, more cost-effective, and much easier to scale. "This is it," Elon said, holding up a prototype of the new storage system. "This is going to change everything." The new system was capable of storing hydrogen at room temperature and at much lower pressures than previous designs, drastically reducing both the cost and the complexity of transporting hydrogen across the globe. The implications were huge. This new technology could allow for hydrogen-powered cars, trucks, and planes to become a reality much sooner than anticipated. It would also pave the way for clean, distributed power systems in places that had previously been unable to afford such technologies. The breakthrough was met with excitement, but Nick knew they couldn't rest yet. This was just the beginning. With the hydrogen storage breakthrough, and with increasing adoption of the water-powered car and solar technologies around the world, Nick and Elon could finally see the vision for the future coming into focus. The challenge now was making sure that these innovations reached every corner of the globe. Nick stood at the edge of a new solar-powered facility in Africa, watching the sun set over a newly built solar field. Behind him, he heard the hum of hydrogen fuel cells powering the plant, and the realization hit him. The world was beginning to shift. It wasn't just about cars or even energy anymore. It was about transforming society. The road ahead was long, but Nick knew that they were on the right path. With the global clean energy coalition gaining strength, the technological breakthroughs continuing to come through, and a groundswell of public support for sustainable progress, there was no turning back. The future had arrived, and it was cleaner, brighter, and more sustainable than anyone had dared to imagine. How do you think hydrogen will shape the future of energy? What are the biggest obstacles to making hydrogen-powered technology a mainstream solution? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tipping point had arrived, though no one knew it until it was too late. The world had crossed a threshold, one that would forever change the trajectory of history. Clean energy had gone from being a distant hope to an undeniable reality. And yet, with all of the progress, there was one final challenge ahead: humanity's willingness to act. Nick Hamilton stood at the edge of the California coastline, gazing out at the horizon. The sun had just dipped below the Pacific, casting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Beside him stood Elon Musk, his partner in this monumental journey. "This is it, Nick," Elon said quietly. "The world has changed." Nick nodded. The water-powered car was now in full-scale production, reaching every corner of the globe. Solar and wind power had replaced fossil fuels in more than half of the world's major cities. Hydrogen was becoming the go-to fuel for industries and transportation. But the hardest part was yet to come. The world needed to transition rapidly, and there was still deep resistance in parts of the world. The financial power of fossil fuel giants had not disappeared, and entrenched political systems were still stalling. And then there was human nature. People had become comfortable. Even those who were advocates of climate action knew that real change would require sacrifice, hard work, and, most of all, time. A decade of innovation had laid the foundation, but the most difficult battle would be convincing humanity to take the leap and leave their old ways behind. While the revolution was happening, the climate crisis was accelerating at an alarming rate. Natural disasters, wildfires, hurricanes, floods, were becoming more intense and more frequent. The polar ice caps were melting faster than predicted, and sea levels were rising, displacing millions of people around the world. The statistics were clear. Global temperatures were reaching dangerous levels. Scientists warned that if immediate action wasn't taken, many of the world's coastal cities would soon be submerged, and entire ecosystems would collapse. Governments and environmental organizations were now publicly declaring a state of global emergency, but progress in reducing emissions and investing in clean energy technologies wasn't fast enough to match the growing crisis. Nick and Elon, despite their optimism, knew that they were racing against the clock. Their technological innovations had shown the world what was possible, but the real shift in mindset, the realization that everyone had to act, was still slow in coming. People were still driven by short-term gain and convenience, unwilling to see the long-term costs. Nick had learned early on that changing the world wasn't just about the right technology. It was about changing minds. To create lasting impact, they needed to ensure the public understood that a sustainable future wasn't just better for the planet, it was better for them. In cities all over the world, clean energy solutions were being embraced. There were massive solar farms in Africa, hydrogen-powered trains running through Europe, and water-powered vehicles zipping through American cities. Yet, the change wasn't universal. While younger generations were enthusiastic and driven, older generations, especially in more conservative countries, clung to the old ways. The narrative had to be shifted. Nick turned to social media, one of the most powerful tools for changing public opinion. Through campaigns, viral videos, and engaging stories, they could show the world that a clean, sustainable future was something everyone could participate in, something that would bring prosperity and stability. People need to see that we're not just talking about technology. We're talking about life as we know it, Nick said during a meeting with Elon and their communications team. We need to show them the real cost of doing nothing and the real benefits of acting now. They launched a global campaign called Tomorrow Starts Today. The campaign featured compelling stories from people who had already made the switch to clean energy, farmers who had converted to solar-powered irrigation, factory workers who had helped build water-powered cars, and children who could breathe cleaner air. It was a reminder that change wasn't coming. It was already here. As the campaign gained momentum, more people began to demand change. Citizens from every corner of the globe were starting to raise their voices, pushing governments and businesses to adopt clean energy policies. Slowly, the political landscape began to shift. The governments of nations that had been reluctant to embrace clean energy technologies were starting to feel the pressure. Public demand for climate action was now at an all-time high, and business leaders, no longer willing to ignore the inevitable, began shifting their strategies. No longer was the question whether clean energy was viable. It was how quickly could we implement it? The turning point came when the United States, under a new president who was committed to climate action, introduced sweeping green energy legislation. The bill included massive investments in renewable energy, incentives for electric vehicle adoption, and policies that aimed to make fossil fuel dependence a thing of the past. China, which had long been a major polluter, announced a bold new plan to reduce its carbon footprint, investing heavily in solar and wind power while phasing out coal. Even countries like Russia, historically resistant to renewable energy, were now exploring partnerships with tech companies like Tesla to develop clean energy solutions. "We're witnessing history," Nick said, his voice tinged with awe. "The world is moving, and we're helping lead it." Despite these significant victories, the transition to a fully sustainable world was far from over. Infrastructure was still lacking in many parts of the world. While large cities in developed countries had seen a boom in green technology, rural areas often lagged behind, still dependent on outdated energy sources. Nick and Elon knew that the most difficult challenges would be in ensuring universal access to clean energy. If the revolution was to be complete, the benefits had to reach everyone, rich and poor, urban and rural. They began focusing their efforts on the last mile of the transformation, how to make renewable energy affordable and accessible to those who had been left out of the conversation so far. Through partnerships with governments and NGOs, they focused on creating localized energy solutions, solar-powered microgrids that could serve remote villages and low-income communities. The goal was to make clean energy a right, not a privilege. Years passed. The world had fully embraced the clean energy future that Nick and Elon had envisioned. The water-powered car was a mainstream reality, found on roads across the globe. Hydrogen-powered trains were running through continents, connecting nations and cities with clean transportation. Solar fields dotted the landscape, and wind turbines turned steadily in the distance, generating clean, renewable energy for billions. The planet's temperature had begun to stabilize. Carbon emissions had dropped by 60% globally. The oceans were recovering. Cities that had once been choked with pollution now thrived in cleaner air, and more people had access to the resources they needed to live sustainable, prosperous lives. Nick stood at the same spot on the California coastline, the sun now rising over the horizon. He could see the changes. The world was no longer the same place it had been when they first started their journey. It had been a long, difficult road, but they had done it. "We did it," Nick whispered, barely able to believe it. Elon, standing beside him, smiled. "No, we didn't. We just set the stage. The world did it." Together, they had started something irreversible, a revolution that would define the future of humanity. And as the world moved into the clean energy age, there was only one thing left to do: keep moving forward. As Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk surveyed the incredible progress they had made in the clean energy revolution, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. However, their triumph was short-lived. With every victory came an unforeseen complication that threatened to derail their ambitions. The world had embraced clean energy, but a new, unexpected challenge emerged, one that no one had fully anticipated. It was called greenwashing. At first, it seemed like an issue that could be dealt with easily. Greenwashing, the practice of falsely claiming environmental responsibility, was becoming more common as businesses jumped on the clean energy bandwagon to capitalize on consumer demand for sustainable products. What began as a few rogue companies making misleading claims soon snowballed into a much larger problem. The issue was systemic. While the public was excited about the shift to clean energy, they didn't always know how to distinguish between genuine efforts and those made simply for profit. Corporations, big and small, were now marketing themselves as eco-friendly without actually changing the way they operated. It was a deceptive practice that threatened to undermine the hard-won trust that had been built over the years. Nick and Elon were blindsided. They knew that if the public began to doubt the authenticity of sustainable efforts, it could reverse the progress they had made. It wasn't just about selling the right technology anymore. It was about creating a culture of accountability. We need to make this a global issue, Nick said during an urgent meeting with Elon. If we don't take action, the momentum we've built will be lost. People will start to believe that all this clean energy talk is just a marketing ploy. Elon, typically optimistic, didn't have an immediate solution, but he understood the urgency. It's a double-edged sword. The fact that companies want to go green is a good thing, but they need to do it the right way. Nick knew that the clean energy revolution had created an industry with so much opportunity for growth that it was too tempting for some to take shortcuts. But those shortcuts could cost the planet. The truth needs to come out, Nick said firmly. We can't allow these companies to tarnish the movement. We need to build a system that guarantees transparency and sets standards for sustainable practices. They decided to launch the Corporate Accountability Campaign, a comprehensive effort to hold companies accountable for their environmental claims. The campaign would involve the creation of a third-party certification system that assessed whether companies were truly reducing their carbon footprint and investing in sustainable practices, or simply using the buzzwords to boost their profits. We'll work with environmental NGOs, regulators, and other stakeholders, Nick explained. If we can create a universal standard for clean practices, we'll set the benchmark for everyone. No one will be able to get away with false claims. As expected, the corporate backlash came quickly. Many companies, especially those whose profits were tied to fossil fuels or unsustainable practices, lobbied aggressively to block the new certification standards. They claimed that the regulations were too strict, too costly, and that they would disrupt industries that were just beginning to shift toward cleaner alternatives. Some of the biggest names in retail, automotive, and even tech companies were among the fiercest opponents. This is a huge disruption to the status quo, one executive from a major oil company said in a public interview. The transition to green energy should happen organically. We shouldn't be forced to comply with arbitrary standards. Nick wasn't deterred. He had seen resistance before. The fight against greenwashing, however, wasn't just about technology, it was about education. They had to convince the public that accountability was just as important as the products themselves. People want to believe in change. They want to believe in the future, Nick said to his team. We're going to give them the tools to see through the noise. Nick and Elon weren't the only ones tackling greenwashing. Governments across the globe had begun to wake up to the severity of the problem. But even with international support, progress was slow. Bureaucracy, competing interests, and political pressure made it difficult to pass legislation that would truly tackle the issue. In the European Union, lawmakers debated new greenwashing regulations, but corporations lobbied fiercely to water down the rules. In the United States, some states pushed for more stringent standards, while others were more hesitant, fearing the economic impact of implementing such a sweeping system. We're going to need a global coalition, Elon said as they discussed the political landscape. We can't do this alone. They began building alliances with influential environmental organizations, world leaders, and sustainable businesses. Together, they launched a massive international campaign to pressure governments to take action. The Green Coalition, as it came to be known, created a unified front, advocating for clear labeling of eco-friendly products and demanding transparency from companies. The coalition's message was simple: no more false claims. If you're going to claim you're green, you need to prove it. It was an op-ed in the New York Times that shifted the conversation. Written by a prominent climate scientist, the piece called out the growing threat of greenwashing and its potential to derail the global movement toward a clean energy future. The article was widely shared and ignited a wave of public outrage. Consumers, who had been optimistic about the impact of their purchases, began to feel betrayed. They were demanding that companies take real responsibility, not just green logos. Online petitions started flooding social media, and environmental activists organized peaceful protests outside corporate headquarters. The collective outrage reached a fever pitch when a high-profile corporation, known for their eco-friendly marketing, was exposed for its misleading practices. Under pressure from investigative journalists, it was revealed that they had been using unsustainable materials and falsifying emissions data. This is exactly what we've been talking about, Nick said to his team. This is the wake-up call the world needed. The public demanded change, and governments finally started to listen. New greenwashing regulations were introduced across several major markets, and companies were forced to adapt or face penalties. The third-party certification system went global, and businesses were now held to the highest standards of sustainability. As the campaign gained momentum, more and more companies embraced true transparency. They knew that consumers were now watching their every move. Certifications like the Eco-Trust seal became a mark of distinction in the market, and businesses began to adopt genuine sustainable practices rather than rely on empty marketing claims. Nick and Elon's corporate accountability campaign became a model for future efforts to keep industries in check. The movement had grown beyond just clean energy. It was now about ensuring that the entire economy moved toward sustainability. The water-powered car became a symbol of this new era, not just as a groundbreaking technology, but as a beacon for what was possible when businesses put the planet first. Years later, as Nick stood on a stage in front of thousands of young entrepreneurs and innovators at a global summit, he reflected on how far they had come. The marketplace had transformed. Clean energy was now the dominant force in the world's economy, and the practice of greenwashing had been largely eradicated. The focus had shifted from superficial claims to real impact. Industries were now incentivized to adopt sustainable practices, and consumers had become activists in their own right, demanding transparency, accountability, and integrity from the companies they supported. Nick glanced over at Elon, who was speaking to a group of young innovators in the front row. The future was in good hands. The clean energy revolution had laid the foundation for an entirely new world, one built on honesty, accountability, and a shared commitment to protecting the planet. The road hadn't been easy, but they had done it. They had not only transformed the world's energy systems, but they had also changed the very way people thought about business, innovation, and sustainability. The future was clean, and it was here to stay. The world had changed, and yet, it still felt like there was so much left to do. Nick Hamilton stood before a crowd at the Global Sustainability Summit in Singapore, where the clean energy revolution had come full circle. 10 years ago, he would have never imagined standing on a stage like this, talking about the future of the planet, a future that seemed both so distant and yet incredibly close. His journey with Elon Musk had already rewritten the book on innovation, but this chapter was different. This wasn't about technology anymore. It was about legacy and about ensuring that the world they had created was not just a fleeting trend, but a permanent shift in the way humanity lived, worked, and interacted with the planet. The audience of young activists, entrepreneurs, and leaders from every corner of the globe had gathered to reflect on the progress of the past decade. It was a moment of celebration, but also a moment of deep reflection, because the truth was, no matter how far they had come, the work wasn't finished. Despite the clean energy revolution having gained massive traction in major urban areas across the globe, there were still large portions of the world where access to reliable and affordable energy was a distant dream. The struggle to bring renewable energy to developing nations was far from over. Nick had long believed that a global transition to clean energy couldn't truly be called a success until every person on Earth had access to affordable, sustainable energy. And while large cities in Europe, North America, and parts of Asia had been transformed, many rural areas, especially in Africa, South Asia, and parts of Latin America, were still dependent on outdated and polluting energy sources. This final frontier, the last mile of clean energy access, would require massive infrastructure investments, innovation, and a global commitment to fairness. The technology was already available, from solar microgrids to hydropower and wind farms, but bringing it to the people who needed it most would take time, resources, and a renewed sense of urgency. "We've made great strides," Nick said, addressing the audience at the summit, "but the job is far from over. There are still millions who live without access to clean energy. And the truth is, until we can empower everyone, we cannot truly say we've succeeded." Elon Musk had always been the dreamer, the one to push the boundaries of what was possible. As he had with SpaceX and Tesla, Elon was now thinking about the next bold leap. Solar City 2.0. "We're not just talking about providing energy to those who have never had it before," Elon explained in his keynote address at the summit. "We're talking about completely changing the game, rethinking energy as a whole. In the next decade, we will build smart cities powered entirely by renewable sources." Elon's vision was of a world where self-sustaining communities no longer relied on large, centralized grids. Instead, solar-powered communities, supported by local battery storage and advanced energy management systems, would be the norm. These would be places where every home, every school, and every business was part of an interconnected energy ecosystem that produced, stored, and shared energy. The goal was to make clean energy not just a tool for survival, but a way of life, one that empowered communities to thrive independently. And while it sounded revolutionary, it wasn't just a concept anymore. The first pilot cities were already in development, smart, solar-powered communities built with the latest sustainable infrastructure, designed to scale and be replicated worldwide. One of the most surprising developments that emerged alongside the clean energy revolution was the rise of bioengineering as a tool for addressing climate change. While Elon's vision focused on renewable energy, other scientists and innovators had begun looking for ways to manipulate nature itself to undo the damage that had already been done. Biotechnology was now being used to engineer plants, microorganisms, and even soil that could help restore ecosystems, absorb excess carbon dioxide, and improve the resilience of the world's food systems. Nick had visited one such bioengineering project in Costa Rica, where scientists had genetically modified algae to grow at a rapid pace, drawing excess carbon from the atmosphere and converting it into a form that could be safely stored or used to generate energy. This isn't just about reducing emissions anymore, Nick said in an interview. It's about restoring the planet. We're using nature's own blueprint to fix what was broken. While these projects were still in the early stages, the potential to reverse some of the damage done by centuries of industrialization was real. And for the first time in human history, people weren't just trying to mitigate climate change, they were actively seeking to repair the environment. The global clean energy movement had achieved so much, but there was still one persistent challenge that continued to threaten progress: political divisions. Despite the overwhelming evidence supporting the need for urgent climate action, political leaders in many parts of the world remained divided on the issue. Climate change was still treated as a partisan issue in many countries, and progress on global climate agreements was slow and difficult. Nick had learned that the key to overcoming these divides was dialogue. He had spent the past several years working behind the scenes, speaking to world leaders across the political spectrum, showing them that clean energy wasn't just an environmental issue. It was an economic issue, a national security issue, and a public health issue. If we can prove that this is the future for all people, Nick said, addressing the summit, then no political divide can stop us. The transition to a clean energy future is inevitable. It's simply a matter of when, and whether we will lead that change or be dragged behind. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the clean energy revolution was the role that grassroots movements had played in driving change. Young activists, led by the global youth climate strikes, had sparked a worldwide movement calling for urgent climate action. Their energy and passion had forced even the most resistant governments and corporations to act. "We didn't just watch history happen," said Greta Thunberg in her speech at the summit. "We made history happen." The youth movement had shifted the narrative around climate change, from a problem for future generations to a crisis that demanded immediate action. What began as a series of protests in European cities had grown into a global climate justice movement, one that transcended borders, religions, and ideologies. These young people were now not only demanding action, they were creating it. The impact of these grassroots movements was undeniable. From sustainable fashion to corporate transparency and the rise of clean technologies, young people around the world had fundamentally changed the conversation about what was possible. Nick Hamilton, standing at the podium at the Global Sustainability Summit, looked out at the faces of the young innovators and leaders in the audience. The world had been forever changed by the past decade of clean energy innovation, but more importantly, a new global consciousness had emerged. One that recognized that true sustainability meant living in harmony with the planet and each other. Change doesn't happen because of one person, one company, or one country, Nick concluded in his speech. It happens because of all of us. We are in this together. And when we work together, there is nothing we can't achieve. The world we've dreamed of is not just possible, it's already happening. We are living it. And this is just the beginning. As the crowd erupted in applause, Nick felt a deep sense of hope. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, the future felt limitless. The world had found its way, one step, one innovation, and one community at a time. What do you think is the next big challenge we face on the road to a clean energy future? How can we ensure that all communities, no matter their resources, have access to sustainable energy? Share your thoughts below. It had been 20 years since Nick Hamilton and Elon Musk had first crossed paths, sparking a revolution that reshaped the world's energy systems. A revolution not just in technology, but in the way humanity interacted with the planet. And now, as Nick sat in his quiet study, reflecting on everything they had accomplished, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. They had done more than just change the world. They had fundamentally altered the way people thought about progress, innovation, and sustainability. But as the planet now stood on the precipice of a new era, Nick knew that this moment of triumph was not the end, but merely a new beginning. The past 2 decades had been filled with unprecedented challenges, monumental breakthroughs, and unexpected twists. There had been moments of doubt, moments when the dream of a clean energy future had seemed almost out of reach. But with determination, collaboration, and an unyielding commitment to the greater good, they had overcome every obstacle. And yet, despite all they had achieved, Nick couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead of them. The world had changed, but now, it was time to make sure it didn't slip back into the same destructive patterns of the past. The fight for the planet was far from over. As Nick reflected on their journey, his mind kept coming back to one thing: the next generation. In all the years of battling greenwashing, pushing clean energy innovations, and establishing global standards, one constant had been clear. The future wasn't going to be shaped by people like him or Elon. It was going to be shaped by the young minds who were coming of age now, who had grown up in a world that was radically different from the one Nick had known. At the heart of their work had always been a belief in education, in empowering people to not just understand sustainability but to live it. The clean energy revolution had started in laboratories and boardrooms, but it had flourished in the classrooms, where young people had been taught that they had the power to change the world. Nick had seen it firsthand: the passion, the drive, and the vision of young innovators who were taking the mantle and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He thought about his own children, teenagers now, raised in a world where sustainability was a core value, who had already started working on their own projects to address climate change. One was researching sustainable agriculture methods, while the other was developing software aimed at helping businesses track and reduce their carbon footprints. Their generation, Nick realized, was not just inheriting the world, they were reimagining it. One of the most exciting developments in clean energy had come from an unexpected source: quantum computing. While solar panels, wind farms, and energy storage had transformed the way the world produced and consumed energy, the true next frontier was in quantum energy systems, energy technologies powered by quantum mechanics that had the potential to revolutionize how energy was created, stored, and transmitted. Nick had watched this development from the sidelines with growing excitement. Quantum computers, which had once seemed like a science fiction fantasy, were now beginning to tackle some of the biggest problems in energy systems: optimization, efficiency, and storage. What we're talking about now isn't just more efficient solar cells or better batteries, Nick explained in a recent talk. We're talking about an entirely new way of generating and using energy systems that don't rely on the traditional models of today. Quantum energy could one day solve problems that we've only dreamed of. As quantum computing became more advanced, it started to be used to solve one of the most pressing challenges in the energy sector: how to store vast amounts of energy. The potential for quantum-based storage solutions was staggering. Instead of relying on conventional batteries that had limited capacity, researchers were now working on ways to store energy in quantum states, allowing for virtually limitless storage and transportability. This new approach to energy, dubbed quantum energy systems, could be the final breakthrough that would eliminate energy scarcity once and for all. One of the most profound shifts that had occurred over the past decades was the growth of a unified global movement. For years, the clean energy fight had been an uphill battle, marked by political squabbles, economic resistance, and corporate greed. But now, unity had emerged. It wasn't perfect, and there were still voices of opposition, but the commitment to a cleaner, more sustainable world was stronger than ever before. The Global Sustainability Accords, a set of international agreements that Nick, Elon, and other leaders had championed, were now in place, creating binding commitments for countries to reduce their carbon emissions to net zero. The accords had influenced policy in nations around the world, holding governments accountable for their promises and pushing corporations to adopt true sustainability across every industry. Technology, too, had played a major role in fostering this unity. Digital platforms allowed activists, innovators, and policymakers from different corners of the world to collaborate and strategize in real time. Global hackathons focused on finding new ways to store energy, reduce waste, and harness renewable resources had brought together some of the brightest minds, creating solutions that transcended borders. Nick had been part of the first international summit on clean energy, where leaders from every country signed the initial accords. Now, decades later, he could look out and see the fruits of that labor. Global cooperation, driven by a common goal of saving the planet. Nick Hamilton looked out over the vast landscape from his office window in the New Earth Tower, the world's first fully self-sustaining skyscraper, powered by wind, solar, and geothermal energy. The city of tomorrow, once a dream, was now a reality. But despite the incredible progress, Nick knew that this wasn't the end. There would always be challenges ahead. There would always be those who fought to return to the old ways, who sought to undermine the progress they had made. There would always be new obstacles, and the work of sustainability would never truly be done. Yet, in that moment, as he watched the city come alive under the dawn of a new day, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. They had built something incredible. They had created a world of possibility, one where future generations could thrive without fear of resource depletion or environmental collapse. And in doing so, they had created a legacy of hope. But as Nick walked down the long hallways of the United Global Sustainability Complex, a new challenge emerged in the distance. A challenge that would redefine the very concept of progress once again. "Nick, we have to talk," Elon Musk said as he stepped into the room, his eyes filled with a familiar intensity. "I think we've cracked it." Nick raised an eyebrow. "Cracked what?" Elon smiled, a grin of excitement spreading across his face. "The next step, the one that's going to change everything." Nick's heart skipped a beat. He had been through countless challenges, faced seemingly insurmountable odds, but every time, Elon had pushed forward, opening doors to new frontiers. It was in Elon's nature to push boundaries, to ask questions that no one else dared to ask. And now, he was about to do it again. "What's next?" Nick asked, eager to hear what would come next. Elon's eyes sparkled as he spoke. "I'm talking about fusion energy, the holy grail of clean energy. If we can harness the power of the stars, we'll have limitless energy. For everyone, forever." Nick couldn't help but laugh. It was typical Elon, never satisfied, always aiming higher. But as he looked at his friend, he knew that this was more than just a dream. This was the next frontier. And just like the last revolution, this one was bound to blow people's minds.